Welcome to the Planning Committee, everybody. I'm Councillor Judith Smythe, Chair of the Planning Committee. Please be assured that we have put in place appropriate cleansing and social distancing measures to ensure that this meeting is undertaken in a COVID-secure manner. Limited public seating has been made available. However, this meeting is also being webcast to allow the public to attend remotely if they so wish. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. Actually, there's nobody up there yet, so that doesn't apply. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble by Queen Victoria's statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust fire marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should also sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. May I draw everybody's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed. Everyone speaking via a microphone will be on camera, including those making deputations. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Is there anybody who wants to state that? No? Okay. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they've finished. I'm a great offender on that, so remind me if I do it wrong. I'd like now for the members of the Planning Committee first to introduce themselves. I'll start with Councillor Smith.
Councillor John Smith, Councillor for East and Craneswater. Thank you.
Darren.
Thanks, Judith. I'm Councillor Darren Sanders. I'm a councillor for Baffin's Ward.
I'm Councillor Russell Simpson, Hillsey Ward.
Councillor George Fielding, Central Southsea Ward.
Councillor Steve Pitt, Melton Ward.
Councillor Hugh Mason, St Jude Ward.
Good morning, Chair. Chris Atwell, St Thomas Ward and Vice Chair of the Committee.
Thank you very much. Now if I can move to the officers present here to help us with our decisions. Kieran.
Good morning, my name's Kieran Laven. I'm one of the Council's planning solicitors.
Good morning, Ian Maguire, Assistant Director for Planning and Economic Growth.
Thank you.
Jane Didino, Local Democracy Officer.
Thank you. And we have here two people who are going to do deputations. We'll introduce you when your item comes on, if that's all right. Good. For clarification of proceedings, each agenda item will be presented in the following order. The officer's planning application presentation. Secondly, any deputations, allowing up to 12 minutes total and with objections going first. And we'll use a stopwatch or the clock to make sure that people don't exceed the time. When you have 2 or 3 people giving a deputation, you have to divide that time, but that doesn't seem to apply today. Then we go on to members' questions. That's points of clarification, and then comments, including proposals for a decision, which must then be seconded, and then the planning decision will be made. So, first of all, could I ask for apologies for absence, please?
Yes, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Gerald Vernon Jackson. I'm deputising for him today.
Thank you.
Chair, you've also had apologies from Councillors Robert New and Linda Symes.
Thank you. And are there any declarations of interest that we need to take into account? Councillor Sanders.
Yes, I have a blanket personal but not prejudicial interest as I live in a HMO.
Thank you. That doesn't mean that you can't participate, so good.
I don't believe so unless the lawyers tell me otherwise.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Councillor Sanders. I'll note that.
Thank you. Anybody else? No. Okay. Then we will proceed to look at the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 6th of July 2022. That's pages 7 to 16 of the agenda. And I'm going to just go through these very quickly. If you have a matter arising or a question about the accuracy of the minutes. I'm using the big page numbers, page 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. So is it okay if I sign those as a correct record? I'll do that in due course. Good. Okay. We've now got, we haven't got a report from you in general on this agenda. Do we have any news of any appeals or any other decisions maybe by the inspectorate that might be relevant to our decisions today?
Within Portsmouth's local authority area, no, we've had a number of appeals, as you can see from the agenda of the SMAT, starting in Portsmouth, but no new appeal decisions dealing with this specific issue. There are obviously appeals in the past, the Campbell property appeals for Portsmouth, and indeed appeals elsewhere in the country, similar to Campbell property that we are aware of, but nothing new in Portsmouth.
Thank you. Everybody's got a copy of the Supplementary Matters. So I hope you can read those in conjunction with the agenda. And we also have an additional item, 13 Shadwell Road, and we'll give people a moment to look at it just before we go through that item in case people haven't had time to read it in detail. Good. Okay, so the first application we're going to deal with is...
Before we start with the first application, can I just give a couple of general update points, if possible?
Yes.
Members, can I draw your attention to the SMAT? Obviously, we'll come to this on individual applications. A number of the applications you have today have appeals against non-determinations submitted for them. Most of them, and the SMAT gives you a relatively recent update, are not yet valid. So technically, you still have the rights to determine the application one way or the other. Obviously, plan permission granted, one would anticipate the applicant would be intending to withdraw such invalid appeal, or yet validated appeal, I should say. Obviously, if you were to refuse that application, the applicant would then need to amend their appeal from a non-determination application to an application against the refusal of planning permission. There is one, as noted on the SMAT exception to this, the late item 13 Shadwell Road, which is a valid and started appeal, so you do not have the authority to determine it. That now vests with the planning inspectorate, so you're asked to come to what you would have said, so that can obviously inform the appeal statement for that application. I do have to update the SMAT, and apologies, I've just been quickly doing that while you've been doing the minutes. 54 Sheffield, the first item 2200449, has also now been validated late yesterday. So while the SMAT says you can go on and determine that, unfortunately, no, you similarly don't have the authority to determine that one. So again, that's another what would you have done, so that can inform the appeal statement. Again, obviously, if you would have granted it, the applicant unfortunately therefore has missed that opportunity to amend that. But obviously, either way, we would like to know the opinion of the committee to inform our engagement with that appeal, which is now a valid appeal at 54 Sheffield. All the other ones that reference their non-determination appeals are yet to be validated and thus still vest with this committee to determine today.
Can we be very clear? The ones where it says they've already, if the appeal hasn't yet been validated, then we have still the right and the duty to look at it.
That is correct.
Yep. And so that applies to quite a number on here. And that's partly why I asked you the question earlier. There's none where the inspector has already ruled.
No, that's quite great. So there's two on here that don't have appeals. That's 35 Bailey's Road and 98 Manners Road. Two that have valid appeals. One started, 13 Shadwell and Sheffield Road, and the rest have appeals in but are not yet validated, so you should determine them in the normal way.
Thank you. Okay. So with that in mind, we can proceed to 54 Sheffield Road. Now we have two decisions to... Councillor Sanders.
Thank you, Judith. Sorry, just to be clear, this is the first time I've looked at these sorts of things before. Where it says pending validation, with which there are now two, as I understand it, we can carry on as normal, essentially, and so everything is as per normal in these sorts of things. where it says as with N95 Castle Road, for example, it's got a valid appeal against non-determination, but it's awaiting a formal appeal date. Are we just essentially offering our advice to the planning inspectorate?
Other way round, so that 6 of these have made appeals but not yet valid, 95 Castle being one of them. There you are, because if you determine them, they're still in your gift. They may be invalid appeals. I would doubt it, but they may be invalid appeals. So it's still in our gift to determine one way or the other. The 2 where you are offering advice to the inspectorate are 13 Shadwell and, as I've just updated, 54 Sheffield Road. They're ones that have live valid appeals currently commencing or have commenced with the inspectorate.
Okay, that's really helpful. So in those 2 cases, because we're just offering advice, effectively, we're not the determining authority. Part of your report on each of these talks about a fallback position, whereby essentially they could just do it anyway, which is your view, you said more than once, and we're grateful to you for that. What happens in this case? Can they just go ahead and do it anyway, regardless of the appeal, in those 2 cases? Can they just go ahead and add another bedroom in any case, in those 2, given that those 2 appeals are now waiting?
Through you, Chair, it's the case for every single one on the agenda. Every single one of them doesn't need plan permission. So whether they are also seeking permission through you or now seeking permission through the planning inspectorate, it is the advice of officers. They all have that fallback and they can just do it. Right. In any case, the appeal is an irrelevancy to that process. That's simply a validation of that position.
Thank you, Ian. So, Judith, through you, is it possible to ask the agent, if the agent is here, because it's one agent for all the applications, including those 2, whether they would just go ahead and do it anyway, regardless of the appeal decision?
Chair, if I may, 2 brief points just to guide the committee. Obviously, your general advice is this isn't a point of debate with the public, so you don't generally ask agents unless there's a need for clarifying a deputation, and indeed there is a deputation from an agent on that first item, so if that requires clarification. However, obviously the decision of whether or not to undertake that work would not be the agent's decision, but the landlord, the landowners, and the agent may be reluctant because it is the opinion, or has been the opinion of this committee, I must stress, on other cases that have material similarities of fact, that plan permission is required. So asking an agent to suggest that their client would undertake an activity that is similar to an activity this council believes is a breach of planning control would be putting that agent in a somewhat invidious position, and they may be unable to answer that question for you.
I think we may get there. Thank you for that, Ian.
George.
Sorry, I've got a late declaration of interest. Item 6, 95 Castle Road, I'm aware of the applicant on a professional basis, and as such I believe I'd have to sit out of that decision.
Well, not necessarily, Councillor. If you'd like to discuss it more privately with me, I'd suggest you turn the mics off and come over here and we discuss it briefly. Cool. Okay.
But
if it's just a professional relationship, you know of them, then it can just be a personal interest rather than a prejudicial interest.
Okay.
If they're a close friend or relative, then, or somebody that you meet up with frequently on a social basis.
I'm happy to say it's just on a professional basis, and as such, it's probably just personal and non-prejudicial then.
So, for my benefit, that was which item? Sorry, item 6?
Item 6, 95 Castle Road. It's just come to light.
And sorry, who is it you know?
The applicant, Mr. Richard Stidoff.
Mr. Stidoff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Better safe than sorry, I think, in these things. Thank you. Members who were with us the last time we did a committee based on these types of applications will remember that we have a sort of 2-stage process here. And these reports have been written very much to draw to our attention the fact we have, in fact, got 2 decisions to make. One is whether or not this is a material change that requires planning permission. And then if we were to say, no, it's not a material change, it doesn't require planning permission, then that business on that item would be finished. If we say, having voted that it does require planning permission, we then move on to the next decision, which is whether or not we should give this particular application a planning permission based on the information that will be provided for us by the planning officer. In the event that we should agree it doesn't require planning permission, I suggest we have a very short introduction from you, Ian, that places that decision in context, and then we can go on and ask you for the full report if we then need it. Are you happy with that? And the two decisions in all are very helpfully highlighted for us. For example, in this report, paragraph 6.1 and 6.2 make it very clear that we're making two separate decisions in this case. So if I could move on then and ask Ian to comment on to introduce to us this application in the light of whether it needs planning permission or not, then we can vote on that and then move on to the substantive details, including space standards and other things that we look at that point.
Thank you, Chair. 54 Sheffield Road, so like everything else, a change of use from an existing HMO to, in this case, a 7-bed house of multiple occupancy. As noted on the SMAT and as updated, you are being asked in this case to advise the inspectorate of what decision you would have made so that the officers can properly incorporate that into the statement of case for what is now a valid appeal for non-determination. There's 54 Sheffield Road, looks like that. You'll see there is a number of HMOs within the local area as discussed in the report. A change in the occupancy is given effect by converting a ground floor study, which you can see bottom left there on the ground floor, into the 7th bedroom, as shown. The development meets your space standards, obviously has no impact on the percentage of HMOs within the local area, and consequently is fully compliant with your policies. Should it need planning permission, officers advise that there is no material change of use from the internal conversion of this bedroom, and plan permission is not required. The recommendation in the report, therefore, is updated by the verbal update to the updated SMAT, highlighting that you are advising the planning inspectorate. Otherwise, I will draw your attention to a correction with a typo on the SMAT and a late letter of objection that we received from a Mr. Henry Thorpe, which has been appended to the SMAT for your information as well for this item.
Do we have any questions or on this? Or shall we move straight for the vote on whether it needs planning permission?
You do have a deputation on this matter.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. Very sorry. You've got 12 minutes to give your deputation. Please proceed. Your name and...
Hello everyone, I'm Carrie-Anne Wells. I'm the agent acting on behalf of Applecor for most of the applications, or all of the applications today. There's no point me getting up and repeating myself for everyone, so I thought I would just speak for this one, and I would like you to consider it for every application that you hear today. A little bit about us. Applecor was founded over 2 years ago. In that time, we've grown to a team of 7. We are currently branching into HMO property management and looking for office space within Portsmouth. This will provide further employment opportunities in the city, which will allow us to help our clients with HMO properties from the initial renovation to then ensuring the property is maintained and managed correctly and any complaints dealt with promptly. At Applecor, we are passionate about designing high-quality shared homes for the benefit of your constituents. The clients I represent today share that passion. All of the applications today meet or exceed the high standards already set in place by Portsmouth City Council. As you will be aware, Portsmouth size standards for shared homes demand some of the largest size standards in the UK. At Applecor, we always strive to exceed that where possible. We design shared homes for both students and professionals who cannot afford to get on the property ladder, and also for professionals who work within the city and are in need of accommodation. There is a huge need in the city for high-quality housing, and in addition to that, Portsmouth cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing. With limited potential to build within such a densely populated city, expanding current properties will add homes for those in need. I've been working with HMO clients in Portsmouth for 6 years now. During that time, the quality of HMO properties in Portsmouth has hugely increased, in part down to the standards introduced by PCC, and in part down to the clients I represent today and the money they've invested both in these properties and in the city to provide high-quality spaces for people to live in. This has only driven up the standards for other landlords within the city. There is a clear need for HMO properties at this price point, which is shown by the ease at which these properties are let. All of these properties that you consider today, I would be happy to let my own son or daughter live in. Having seen most of these properties prior to renovation, I can confidently say my view would have been different. I urge you to fully consider the schemes presented to you today whilst keeping in mind the clear need for housing within the city. With the private sector housing standards now proposing to apply to smaller housing and multiple occupation across the city, this will result in the loss of homes for potentially hundreds of individuals for which these larger HMOs will now be an option. I would also like to extend to you all an invite to see a selection of HMO properties so you can fully appreciate the effort, time and cost our clients put into these properties to ensure, putting these properties and fully appreciate why it would not be in the interest of any of our clients to not ensure the property is maintained and managed to a high standard. To conclude, I cannot stress enough that all of the applications today comply with the local plan and all of your relevant policies. With all due respect, to refuse today would be a waste of time, cost and money for everyone involved and cause further burden on the taxpayers of Portsmouth. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. You're asking us to keep that in mind for the other applications, are you? That's very considerate of you, and thank you very much. Thank you. Any comments, questions about whether or not this needs planning permission or not? Shall I move straight to a vote?
Chair, I don't think we can move straight to a vote because we need to know what we're voting on. So I don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't think we can just say we think this needs planning permission or not. If we're saying it does need planning permission, then we need to be clear about why. Is that right, Ian?
That is the case. The officer's advice is that it doesn't require plan permission. If there are some specific elements on this specific case on its own facts that you feel do demonstrate that there is a material change in the nature of that occupancy, they need to be articulated and understood for the sake of the minutes. And obviously that would then inform, one would assume, any subsequent decision you would make following that.
Darren.
Thanks, Judith. And Ian, following on from that, is the fact that this has now got a valid appeal for non-determination a factor in whether we should actually express an opinion about this or not?
No, so we are obliged to engage with that appeal process. This is the recommendation officers have, and thus would be our statement of case submitted to the inspectorate as the most up-to-date information we have as a position from the local planning authority. If any aspect to this, and then just to be absolutely clear, this says this doesn't need plan permission, so therefore if this committee feels that this does need plan permission, you need to tell us that so that we can factor that minute into the production of the statement of case in that appeal. So it'll be very clear whether Portsmouth City Council, as the local planning authority, does or does not in this case think plan permission is required for the development and the works described within this proposal.
I think then the question before us, before we go into the details of any planning permission that might, or otherwise that might be given to this, is do we consider this as a material enough change to require a planning permission to be given? Could I ask, are you all ready to decide on that? Could I have a proposer and a seconder, so we know whether we're going for? Would anybody like to propose that this does need planning permission or doesn't need planning permission, and then second that?
Can we put in the minutes, here we go again? Okay, I would like to propose that due to the intensity of the use of the accommodation, the impact on parking, waste, amenity upon neighbouring residents and the impact on the Solent Special Protection Area, the changes considered in this case on its own individual merits amounts to development requiring planning permission, and in addition consideration should be given to the impact of nitrates mitigation requirements due to the natural England's conditioning that any additional overnight stays do require mitigation.
Do I have a seconder for that?
I'll second that, thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any alternative proposals? In which case we'll move straight to a vote. If there are not, then okay. Councillor Mason. Oh, getting ready to vote. Right. All those in favour of the motion raise their hands, please. Okay. Thank you very much.
Chairman, may I just ask, I don't know if Councillor Pitt, you had any notes on your statement, but it would be handy to take those from you so we get that verbatim at the end of the meeting, just to save me having to recall exactly what was said.
That's fine, Ian.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. Now, so we'll proceed to look at this planning application on its own merits. Do I have any question, Ian Maguire, you were going to do an introduction to that, or please?
I believe I probably covered off in the general introduction regarding the scheme. Obviously, very happy to answer any questions members have.
Do we have plan of the scheme and that kind of thing that we didn't see in the presentation before?
No, so it's both in the agenda and on the presentation slide that I ran through earlier. Yeah.
Okay. Any questions on the presentation, particularly here, obviously space standards and other aspects of this particular application? Darren.
Thanks, Judith. One question of clarification, if I may, for the agent. Given that this is now a valid appeal for non-determination, and essentially we're just offering advice to the Secretary of State, has the applicant advised the agent that regardless of what we do today, they'll just create an extra bedroom as the planners say they're entitled to?
Is it okay if we ask that?
I think Ian's covered this already, in as much as that you've got an application before you to determine, and the applicant's intentions won't necessarily be known to their agent, and frankly they're not binding anyway. Any answer you get is not particularly persuasive, Councillor.
And I mean, unless you want to volunteer a comment, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Licensing have already agreed this, and there is, I believe, compliance with our space standards, even with the change of room use. Has everybody else understood that? We're moving on then to comments and a recommendation from the floor. Councillor Mason, Hugh.
In view of the lack of concern, that I suggest that we approve the Officer's recommendation that the Secretary of State be advised that Portsmouth City Council Planning Committee resolve to grant unconditional planning permission.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that?
Chairman, may I just assist the committee? Unconditional plan permission is recommended pretty much across the board as plan permission is required. Consequently, conditions would fail the test of necessity. If a planning judgment is reached, as has been done for the specific case here, the plan permission is required, then as we've covered off in section 6, the committee may wish to consider the grant of plan permission as it fully complies with policy, notwithstanding the need or not for plan permission, for some standard conditions, i.e. a condition regarding mitigation to the SPA, a condition regarding approved plans, which is an admin condition, if you will, and a condition to ensure the delivery of bike stalls, sort of, if you will, the 3 standard conditions for HMOs. So if members do agree with Officer's recommendation that, irrespective of the fundamental point, it complies with policy, then it would be incumbent upon them to consider whether conditions should be imposed, and those 3 conditions as outlined in paragraph, I think 6.2, would therefore be that which we would have recommended in that scenario.
Is the conditions that you'd recommend would be what exactly to put onto this?
So to be clear, and this is from paragraph 6.2, would be a condition to require the commencement of the development, i.e. the additional occupancy within 1 year, the time limit condition, the approved plans, condition, and a solar mitigation, solar special protection area mitigation condition. Those 3 standard conditions. Whether or not a bike stall condition or anything else needs to be imposed would obviously be dependent on members' opinion regarding the provision and necessity for such things. But those 3 standard conditions, time limit, approved plans, and the mitigation condition for the SPA would be that the necessary minimum admin conditions or on something that requires planning permission.
So if I've got no seconder for the unconditional permission, is there any other proposals? Steve?
Thank you, Judith. Ian, would that not also therefore automatically require inclusion with the nitrates assessment, not just the SPA?
The nitrates is part of the SPA, has both recreational disturbance and nutrient eutrophication.
So it's bird tax and nitrates for our benefit, yeah, okay.
So it's all in the same part, so that's covered off within that.
In that case, I'd like to propose approval on the basis of conditional permission, including the standard conditions that Ian has already outlined, including and particularly noting the SPA conditions, which I would also note have been upheld as a reason for refusal at appeal on a number of occasions when considering HMO SUI applications. And therefore, at least on those occasions, the inspectors took the view that it was development and therefore it needed their view.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Darren?
I'm happy to second that. As far as I can see, the application meets all the standards that exist as the agent has outlined. And with that condition, I would happily second that.
Is there any alternative views? If not, I'll move to a vote. Could you raise your hands if you're in favour of it being given a conditional permission, conditioned with those 3 conditions that we've heard? Seems that's unanimous. You have your permission. So sorry. Sorry, I'm so sorry. I watched.
7 votes in favour.
Don't worry. Are there any against? Thank you, Russell. So we have a majority in favour of a conditional permission. Thank you. Right, when we move on then to the next item, which is (19) Lawson Road. And we'll go through the same sort of process there. Ian, if you'd like to go first and introduce, then we'll take the deputations and then we'll decide whether or not it's needs permission, and then we'll go on, if we need to discuss the nature of that decision.
Certainly. So to take you very quickly through this, 19 Lawson Road, there it is. Again, an area with a number of HMOs already, obviously unaffected by this. The creation of a 7th bedroom in this place is created by the conversion of a ground floor lounge, which you can see on here, converted into bedroom 7. The only point of note within this, again, obviously officer recommendation plan permission is not required, and therefore it would be an unconditional permission that we would be recommending. There is an appeal for non-determination that has not yet started, so it was in the gift of this committee to determine today. The communal space is an unusual layout compared to others that we see, as you can see from the plan on the screen, that you have a kitchen diner laid out within the site, which is, and I'll quote from para 5.6, the kitchen diner is 21.2 square metres, and that is supplemented by an additional identified cinema room, lounge, at 13.17 square metres. None of the rooms, in this case bedrooms, are over the 10 square metre allowance, which does allow for a reduced communal space. So the logic of that, of course, is that with that smaller bedrooms, and they're around 8.5, 9 sort of scale of 7.5 metres, there would be a more intensive use of the communal spaces, as there is less opportunity for individuals to recreate in their own rooms. In those circumstances, the thresholds required are a combined living space of 34 square metres, or you can have separate kitchen, dining and living spaces with different standards. While these combined, if these spaces were combined, they do come to 34 square metres. As a point of fact, they're not combined. They are two separate rooms, one lounge and one kitchen diner, which obviously reduces and affects their utility. And when we also look at the layout of that kitchen diner, that utility is further affected by its requirement and its linear nature for people to pass and repass through it. So overall, the quality of the living environment created by what is otherwise, on a pure numbers basis, over 34 square metres, is considered to be not the best internal environment that we have seen for HMOs. However, giving clear guidance from officers, as this doesn't require plan permission, that's a somewhat overriding material consideration, and therefore unconditional permission is nevertheless recommended to be granted. The other 2 points I would want to make on this communal amenity space, should the committee decide that plan permission is required and thus engage your policy, the private sector housing team has licensed this site, so they have on their individual basis, which is obviously a far more detailed and robust continuous assessment process, judged that notwithstanding that numerical failure, it is in their opinion creating an adequate living environment for up to 7 occupants, and of course it is a long-standing and existing 6 occupant HMO, which has exactly the same numerical standard. 6 and 7 are the same within your current adopted planning and housing guidance. So it is obviously the case that 7 is a larger number than 6. So something to bear in mind in members' minds should they consider on the individual facts of this case, there are some elements to this that means that this application, contrary to advice, requires planning permission.
Thank you. We need to make a decision whether this is a material enough change to require planning permission. Deputies first. We have Councillor Susie Horton from...
Thank you, Chair. So, yes, I'm Councillor Susie Horton. I'm one of the ward councillors in Central Southsea Ward. I have to leave by 12, so I might not be able to speak on all 4, and I do understand that each application needs to be considered on its own merit, but actually at this speed I might actually get to speak on some of the others. But similarly to Carrie-Anne, the previous deputy, many of the points I'm making in this initial statement apply to all. So if time permits, I'd still want to add something to the other ones because I want to see them all on their own merit, but I will not, you will be pleased to know, be speaking at extent from all of them. And actually, you won't be surprised to know that I'm actually speaking against the recommendation. But I just want to start by saying something I've said previously in this meeting and many times before, and that I do see the need for high-quality shared housing in the city. And I do recognise the optimism and the commitment from many of the developers. Like many people here, I have lived in shared accommodation, and the quality of it is really important. And this committee is responsible for maintaining those high standards across our city. I also want to just say that I have been where you are on the planning committee. I fully understand all the planning constraints that you're working with, but today I'm here to talk up for my residents, primarily for the families and the couples and single people who are living in owner-occupied or rented non-HMO properties in the area. Many people have lived there up to 40 years and they hate the impact of over-intensification of development and this cram-in situation that we find ourselves in, and we have rehearsed many, many times. But I'm also here for some of the occupants of some of the properties to ensure that living conditions for renters are good enough given the high rental costs that they find themselves having to pay. Quite simply, I've rehearsed this before, that I don't agree with planners' view that only one more makes no material difference to the amenity of the area. And that's based on the view that in already oversaturated roads, one more car, bike, bin, flushing of loo, etc. does make a difference. And based on the number of HMOs in all of today's applications in Central Southsea, this equates to potentially and realistically the equivalent addition of many houses worth of extra people. But I do realise that the material planning considerations are most frequently cited in applications like this are where there's no change of bulk or mass to the building. But the real differences that are experienced by residents do relate to traffic, parking, noise, waste, drainage, and the impact of the character and appearance of the area, the impact on the community and other services. And we've also talked in here about this issue of stealth and expansion of houses by stealth. And I understand the recommendations in the report are reasoned on the HMO policy. I get that. Only dealing with the number of houses, not the number of occupants. Dealing with buildings, not humans. But you cannot ignore the fact that 2 up, 2 down properties have been bought by developers, changed to HMOs, up to 6 people, and then arguably because the SPD are now changing to SUIs. And if these applications were C3 family homes, we would be having a different conversation. I take the point that Ian's just made about licensing. On all of these, licensing have not helped the situation here, as far as I'm concerned, by granting licenses up to 7 people, when according to the floor plans, there are only 6 people living in them. And although I suspect that the cinema rooms and studies may not have been used for that purpose for a while, it's difficult to argue against. But turning to the 19 Lawson Road, I know that Ian's outlined the space standards around the kitchen dining room, but I just want you to take a moment to imagine a kitchen diner of that size with an extra person in it. Actually imagine living in there. And I don't think it's something that should be dismissed without serious consideration. We talk about mixed and balanced community. The report here seems to come down to the question of whether the term balance is in relation to the number of properties or the humans. I'm here to argue that expanding them in an area where there's already a density of shared housing by just one is having a detrimental impact on the living conditions for people in my community. And I'm also here to highlight the lived reality of both tenants living without a living room or in a shared kitchen diner, and the impact that will have on their lives as well as their neighbours.
Thank you very much, if that's your end point. Yes, thank you. Good. Can I then ask for a short discussion of whether or not this does need planning permission, or we can move directly to a proposal, depending on the will of the meeting? Darren.
Thank you, Judith. As far as I'm concerned, this does need planning permission. There is a repurposing of internal rooms, so therefore there's a change to the amenity. The licence was granted in January 2020. This application is April 2022. So therefore the licence was granted not on the basis of what we've got before us, but on the basis of what exists now, unless it's been changed. So I think in the interest of openness, transparency and the changes to the amenity, this deserves planning to be considered for planning permission.
Steve.
Thanks, Judith. So in order to put that into planning speak, can we say, because I agree with Councillor Sanders, that due to the intensity of the use of the accommodation, the impact on parking, waste, amenity, impact on neighbouring residents, and the impact on the Solent Special Protection Area in terms of bird aware tax and also nitrates, the changes considered in this case on its own individual merits amounts to development requiring planning permission.
Do I have a seconder for that? Darren, thank you. Any other views? Okay, we'll move to a vote. Can I ask for all those in favour of the motion put by Councillor Pitt to raise their hands? Okay, we have six in favour. Is that what you count, Kieran? Against? Abstentions? With one abstention. Okay, so we'll now move on to the discussion about this planning decision we're about to make. Ian, do you want to say anything else?
No, the only thing I would just draw members' attention to, obviously, key policies are your HMO mix, which is obviously is unaffected by this, and that quality of internal environment, which obviously is, in this case, unique within your agenda today, is one where I think some judgment needs to be applied. Frankly, there is a reasonable judgment either way on this one, whether it does comply with policy PCS 23, supporting the quality of future living environments. And as I mentioned earlier, obviously the overall size of the site has been deemed acceptable for both 6 or 7 people, which is the current circumstance. So your policy is capable of interpretation either way. There is a bit of a practical judgment to make in if these two rooms had been physically combined, it would be compliant with policy. So therefore, the mere fact that there is a stairwell and a downstairs shower room dividing the kitchen diner and the cinema room in combination with the overall layout and accessibility of these rooms, is that enough to say the living environment that has obviously been beneficially occupied by 6 people for some time is so unacceptable that plan permission should be withheld? That is really where I recommend members you apply your judgment.
Any questions to on this one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Am I correct in my assumption that the new bedroom which is being created, bedroom 7, was previously amenity space?
Yes, it was a previous ground floor lounge.
For no more, while people are thinking about their questions, can I ask a question, please? The back extension where this very narrow kitchen diner is located, I'm surprised that the applicant didn't seek to either move the external door into the passageway that they could have done on the left, or make a large hole in that wall to enlarge that space. Do you know if that was considered, or is that something that wasn't discussed?
I don't believe we would have discussed any alterations. I'm not entirely sure which. I mean, there is.
If you look at the kitchen diner at the
Yes,
back,
yeah.
there's a sort of wasted dogleg of hall between the shower and the kitchen diner, with the 2 doors. The door opening, if I read the plan correctly.
Yes, obviously the door into the rear amenity space is in that rear outrigger, just beyond the shower, and obviously it could be closer to the shower's dividing wall and thus less in movement through the site. It may well be that that's an existing opening, and thus from a practical building point of view far easier to utilise as an existing or future door rather than cutting a new hole, but whether that would make a notable difference. Technically the door could be conditioned to be repositioned somewhere else along that wall. There would be nothing to particularly prohibit it, but whether that would make a fundamental difference to members' judgment obviously would be a choice for members to make.
Certainly if you were taking your meal from the kitchen diner to eat in the communal room, you've had 2 lots of doors to negotiate, three lots of doors to negotiate, which seems could be reduced to 2. Any other questions? So can we move to comments and a proposal? Darren?
Thank you, Judith. I propose that we refuse this application on the grounds that it does not comply with local plan policy PCS 23 due to the quality of living environment created for this number of occupants. You colleagues will note that is word for word what the officers have said in 5.7, so I hope it's correct. I'm delighted that Susie and Gerald have brought this here today, and this is one of the reasons why this happens, because many of us wouldn't have known, for instance, that one of the bedrooms being created used to be amenity space. So the amount of amenity space that was licensed in 2020 is going down. We wouldn't know the officer's comments with regards to the overall space and the difference between the two. As Cabinet Member for Housing, I see a lot of first-tier tribunals about the sort of space standards that landlords hate, our space standards in the city. I think it's sensible that people live in sensible accommodation. Unlike what Ms Wells said earlier, this application, unlike her Sheffield Road application, doesn't meet the space standards, and not by a little. I mean, the kitchen diner is 12.8 square metres less. That's significant, especially when amenity space has already been lost. So in this application, because firstly, this is not what was licensed 2 years ago. Secondly, because there is an amenity room that is lost. And thirdly, based on the officer's own suggestions and the the table in 5.7, I think we are on reasonable grounds to refuse this application on the grounds it doesn't comply with PCS 23 because of the loss of amenity for past and future residents.
And I'll second that.
That was you, Russell, is it? Good, thank you. Do we have any other alternative? Steve?
Not an alternative, just a comment, Chair. This is not a good layout at all. I've sat on dozens and dozens of these, and this is a really bad layout. You've got bedrooms 1, 2 and 3 on the second floor, effectively having to share the shower room which is on the first floor, because all the tenants on the first floor have got to share the shower room that's on the ground floor. There's one toilet between those 6 bedrooms on those 2 floors where they live. And I think the other thing that often gets missed in this equation is people are living here. So if it's not a student house, and it is let to private tenants, and we know that there is a need for that kind of property. But that means that these people, up to a certain point, had the benefit of a certain amount of amenity space, and that amenity space has just been reduced in their own property. So like everyone on this committee, to think for a moment, if you suddenly went home and found out that your lounge was no longer able to be used by you as your lounge. Because effectively that is what we're talking about here. Those current 6 tenants, before that study or whatever, it was misnamed on a plan just to get it through not needing planning applications, because let's face it, that's what all of these are. We know what they are. Bedroom 7 used to be amenity space, and for the occupants of that property, that amenity space is being removed. Let's be brutally honest, purely for the financial benefit of the landlord and no other reason whatsoever. It's not because they have an altruistic desire to provide more accommodation for the people in Portsmouth. Nobody believes that. It's because they have a desire to earn more money out of the properties that they have. So they use their permitted development rights to expand these properties to the very maximum amount that they possibly can, and then lo and behold, we're going to remove that bit of amenity space, which is how we got the application through in the first place, or didn't require planning before this point. It's a really bad system. It's not our planning department's fault that we're in this position. It's the government's fault. For 40 years, successive governments have failed to come up with proper planning laws that address the needs of the communities. Instead of that, they do things that address the needs of developers. It needs to be flipped round the other way. It's unacceptable. It's gone on too long, and that's why we are literally sat here today with a bunch of applications that, if we had sensible planning laws in this country, would enable us at a local level to come up with a policy that was appropriate for Portsmouth, instead of it being designed in Westminster by people who never set foot in the city. Our planners have no choice but to implement the MPPF as interpreted, and to look for case law which supports a view either way, and that's literally where we are at the moment. But it's not good enough, and we shouldn't just roll over and accept it. Where they're compliant and they offer a good standard of living, that's one thing. This does not do that, and it is yet another example of amenity space simply being removed with no consideration whatsoever to the usability of the remaining space. And in this instance, because it's not one congruent space, it is insufficient for 7 people, in my view, and therefore I would support Councillor Sardar's recommendation.
Good, thank you. I think it's quite important that the substance of that is minuted, because it's something I think that we all understand.
Chairman, if I may, just 2 very quick points, just to ensure the robustness of decision making. Wouldn't wish to obviously anyway disagree with any points Councillor Pitt made. Obviously a very firmly held personal opinion. Members are obliged to give consideration to the fact that providing 1 more bed space does provide accommodation, whatever the motivation for the landlord in providing do so. You don't have enough places to build houses in Portsmouth, not a surprise to anyone that knows Portsmouth, and consequently you do have a presumption in favour of sustainable development, and that does mean, in particular where you don't have a 5-year land supply, that you should be looking to provide as much accommodation as possible. So you must give that appropriate tilted weight to the fact that it's just 1 bedroom, but it's 1 bedroom that you've decided requires planning permission, and therefore it is supported. So you do have to give that weight in your decision making. It's obviously perfectly appropriate for you if, and I'll quote the MPPF, if you are satisfied that the adverse impacts significantly and demonstrably outweigh that benefit, then you can withhold plan permission. You know, the MPF doesn't prevent it, and obviously you identified an adverse impact in the terminology of the quality of the living environment, and if it is significantly and demonstrably outweighing the benefit of providing that additional housing, obviously that's your reason for refusal, but you do have to contextualise your decision making as you are directed on how to weight these matters by the National Planning Policy Framework. You are of course fully aware of that, and I'm sure that was part of it, but to ensure that you're not dismissing the benefits of an additional piece of accommodation. That's one person housed in the city. Obviously it in of itself is benefit. Clearly though that can be outweighed by the harms that you've identified elsewhere. The only other point I would just very briefly make, should you move forward and we have a motion for refusal, officers will be saying at this time you don't have the mitigation for the SPA in place, so an additional reason for refusal should be added to that standardised wording around the fact that as yet obviously it's resolvable on appeal by the necessary contributions, but at this stage any refusal on the grounds of living environment as articulated by Councillor Sanders would have to be supplemented by some standardised wording, same as you looked at for the last HMO committee. I've just literally cut and paste it from the last minute, so I've got it to hand for the nitrates and SPA issues as well, just to suggest that could be included in any motion you wish to make.
It is, of course, always a balance between those two things. Councillor Pitt.
And can we have bike storage in on this one, please, as well, if we are minded to refuse on that basis? I just wanted to reassure Ian that I did vote in favour of the previous application because I was able to come to a balanced judgment on that particular application in terms of the amenity that it was providing to its residents. I take a different view on this one and was using the example of similar properties where I believe that residential amenity has been sacrificed purely for financial gain, and I am not applying that as a blanket view across all applications. That would be inappropriate.
Thank you. Darren.
And I am happy to accept the additional conditions that Ian has put forward, just for clarity.
Good. So we have a proposal to refuse this application with the reasons given. That would be 4 reasons, I think.
Chair, it's going to be worth clarifying that before we go to a vote.
Okay.
If I can assist, I was jotting down as Councillor Sanders spoke. The reason I've noted is obviously the proposal is considered to require plan permission. Furthermore, the change of use of the property would fail to provide a good standard of living accommodation for the occupiers and is thus contrary to policy PCS 23 of the Portsmouth plan, and it's been identified that nitrates, SPA, etc., contrary to the Wildlife and Countryside Act and Section 15 of the NBBF, etc. So 2 reasons for refusal on that basis.
2 reasons, okay. Are we happy to move to a vote to refuse this planning permission on the basis of those 2 reasons that have been identified to us? Would you raise your hands if that's what you want to decide?
Seven votes in favour of refusal.
So we have refused that planning application. Thank you. I'm now going to move on to number 3, 27 Cleveland Road. And we have Susie Horton, Councillor Susie Horton again as the deputy on this one. But first I'll ask Ian to outline this application, potential application.
Thank you. 27 Cleveland Road, there it is. Again, an area with a number of HMOs existing. In this case, the 7th bedroom is created by a ground floor study. You can see at the rear of the property there in the existing becoming bedroom 7. Only thing just to note and drawing attention to the SMAT, not particularly clear on that drawing, apologies. The ground floor WC, which you can see by bedroom 7 there, was originally drawn in as 1 square metre. The applicant has tweaked the plans and confirmed, which we are satisfied is an accurate representation, amended those, so now that is compliant with the minimum standard for WC, which is 1.17 square metres. So we're talking a tiny variation, but on that basis, following that update, which has been verified by our officers, it is fully compliant with space standards. Like all the others, doesn't require plan permission in the professional advice of officers, and in this case, otherwise does fully comply with policy, should policy be applicable to the determination of the application. A couple of images, should members wish to see them, as well, provided by the applicant and verified by the officers in this case. Just to add, again, this is one where we have a live appeal with no start date yet, so it is in the gift of this committee to determine today.
Questions, please, from members? No, deputation from Susie Horton over there. So sorry.
Thank you. And
I must tell you before you start that the live stream records you with a wonderful halo behind your head.
Oh, look at that technology. I will stick to my commitment to not rehearsing everything that I said before, although I would like to point out that on the HMO count for this, it is 56% in the surrounding area. And also there have been some objections from other people. But coming to the specifics of this, I'm not too sure how many times I've seen a kitchen lounge. I was just trying to wonder if I was watching the football last night, and there were, 3 people trying to make their dinner and 4 of us watching the football, how that would actually work. I was trying to work, because on the actual papers, there wasn't before and after. I know that Ian's put it up there, and I was trying to work out what went. So there was a study downstairs, which I imagine at one point was a small kitchen, because these Victorian properties would have had the kitchens at the back. So at some point, a kitchen has been removed from the back, and I don't know in what order all this has happened, and is now part of a kitchen lounge. I just want to, and a study goes and becomes a bedroom. It would have been interesting to see how much of a study it was before, but anyway. I just want to come back to this point about lived experience, and I know Councillor Pitt expressed it very vociferously as well, and trying to imagine that I am living in that property with a kitchen lounge with 7 people without having that having a negative impact on living there. So that's my main point on this one, and the other general points that I made still stand. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, on to questions from members. George.
In the space standards, we've got a situation where shower room 1 is below the required standard and the WC is below the required standard. Is there any given reason for that, and does that have any bearing as to whether planning permission should be granted or not?
Apologies to be, what we've had from the applicant is some updated and clarification on the layout of those rooms. As you can see, it's not that clear in the, well, I'll use the one in the agenda, it's probably clearer than the slide. There's quite a large hallway, because it's serving a lot of purposes. It's serving that rear bedroom 7, the previous study, the shower room and the WC, and a short passage into the rear garden. What the applicant has been able to do is move some of those walls around slightly while maintaining the minimum 10-metre size for new bedroom 7, so that space does now comply with your standards. So it's been updated, which is what we were referring to in the SMAP. Then we could have done a little bit more clearly, apologies. So yeah, they do now meet your standards. But yes, otherwise that substandard provision could potentially have been a reason to withhold planning permission. In truth, there's been very little actual change on the ground. You'll see from the annotations on the drawing that they're to no decimal points. Once we've actually drilled into that, measured it up and gone to those decimal points, they're a lot closer to satisfactory in the first instance, but we can confirm they are fully compliant with your policies under amended plans received since the publication of the agenda.
Steve.
Ian, you just said something very interesting there, and that is that there's been some rounding. Are we sure that none of these 10-metre square bedrooms that are all conveniently exactly 10 metres squared are indeed 10 metres squared and not 9.76 metres squared, and therefore would require a larger communal space?
They are all 10.0 or bigger. Yes, we've checked all of them.
Thank you.
Darren.
Thanks, and again, thank you for that, Ian. Following on from that, just as a point of clarification, given that the first shower room is now the only one that does not meet our standards, I'd be interested to find out from the agent whether the applicant would be happy to increase the size of the shower room. Did you? My apologies.
Yeah.
You've done it for the WC, I'm looking for the shower room.
Yes, apologies, I could have been clearer. Yes, that collection of rooms, the shower room and WC, have both been clarified and amended, so they do meet our
So
standards.
it is now 2.74 metres plus.
That is my understanding. I'm just asking the case officer to give me a specific number so I can quote it for you. As soon as he comes back to me, I'll let you know.
I could live with 10 metres squared or bigger, so thank you for that, Ian.
Thank you. Any other questions? I would like to move then to comments and recommendations.
Ostensibly, this meets the space standards. I am a bit concerned, though, that 7 people are going to live here, and if you look at the floor layout, which is for the previous application, just as an example, not because I know everything's on its own merits, but you'll see on the plans that's on page 29 for that application that there are 2 cookers with hobs and 2 freezers, fridge freezers. On this plan, there is 1 cooker, 1 hob and an oven by the look of it, which are separately annotated, so I'm assuming that the hob is one thing and the oven is what it says it is, and there's not 2 items there. And then there are 2 freezers, which I assume are fridge freezers. If that is the only cooking ability in that house, you imagine having to book your slot because 7 of you want to cook your dinner, and I mean, it's almost laughable, isn't it? Oh, what time am I able to cook my dinner today? I do laugh at some of these things that are, tragically laugh, I guess, at some of these things that are deemed to be good quality of living accommodation for people. However, it is policy compliant.
Are there any other comments? Seems to me the whole thing would look better if the third double sofa was moved back, perhaps against the cupboards. It's no doubt people using the house would find ways of moving the furniture around, but.
Chairman, if I may, the officer has just come back to me with some specific numbers, and I do need to clarify, with my apologies, the shower room is still remaining measured out at just over 2, so it's below the 2.74. Obviously, it's within the gift of the applicant just to knock out that wall, and thus creating a shower room that would be 3 metres over 2.74, so that substandard shower room by a couple of square feet is not deemed to be a sufficient reason to withhold planning permission in officer's recommendation, but apologies to clarify that. My information was slightly incorrect. The shower room is below your adopted standard for shower rooms of 2.74. Toilet is 1.17, we're fine with that one, it's the shower room that falls below it.
Ian, the officer's caveat that's slightly further, I think.
Indeed, the shower room is an additional shower room that's not required by our standards. The point Councillor Pitt makes, and very eloquently, is that usability. But your standards are published and applied across both issues, with the bathroom on the first floor and the shower room on the second floor, which has been updated, so there is a door on it. As the more observant will have noticed, there's currently no door into the shower room on the second floor. That's into the corridor north of it. So with that one bathroom and that shower room, there isn't actually a requirement to have a third shower room. That is an additional benefit. So on that basis, the fact that it is substandard when you combine it, it's a usable space. It's a bit cramped, but it's they could just take it out and still be fully compliant with your policy.
Also, of course, it would eat into the bedroom, and I personally would prefer to see the bedroom size maintained in those circumstances. Are we ready to... George?
Surely we're considering the application before us not on the basis of if plans are changed and walls are removed, then it could be this, it could be that. We're considering the space standards as before us. So if a shower room is below our space standards, no?
To clarify, and apologies because it was an update, the shower room is a bonus They don't need it at all. So the question is, which is better, a house with a bonus small shower room or a house without that shower room? Both are fully compliant with policy. So on that basis, rather than seeking amendments, and as Councillor either said, you could push it into bedroom 7 or something like that to make it, but as it's that would reduce the usability of bedroom 7 to create an unnecessary shower room from a purely policy compliant point of view.
We'll check this, George. It's a good point, because there are other things like on the plan, like the inaccessible shower room on the top floor. But I know that the convention is, and indeed it's upheld in regulation, that if the changes are reported to us by a planning officer and minuted accordingly, or on the SMAT, that we can deviate in those respects from the plans that are actually shown. Is that correct?
Indeed, it's unfortunately a common practice, and obviously do accept the apologies of the planning authority that we didn't catch the lack of doorway into the shower room before publishing the agenda. Clearly there is a door into that shower room, and as I say, it is, for clarification, shown on the submitted plans that would then form part of any updated condition on approved plans, shows that there is a door to the top of that room going into the corridor, so therefore being accessible for bedrooms, well, all the bedrooms, but obviously bedrooms 4, 5 and 6 in particular.
Hugh.
If we're still on comments and questions, could you put up once again the front view of this property? Looking at that property, I don't see how the shower room on the topmost floor can be usable, because there does not appear to be enough headroom space for the toilet or the wash basin.
So you're quite correct, Councillor Mason. The line you can see, and I'll revert rather than showing on here, the line you can see on the plan cutting through the shower room and bedroom 4 is the acceptable headroom for standing. So yes, the wash basin and the toilet are within that. Again, not an unusual layout for bathrooms, because obviously a lot of toilets are used in a sitting position, and people can lean into a wash basin, as shown here. The shower is therefore pushed into that corner, as you can see, to ensure that there is standing room within that shower. So it is a small shower room, but it is of sufficient size, even accounting for that which is less accessible in there. And as many people that have rooms in their loft spaces will know, it is not uncommon to put toilets into that reduced space.
I accept that the shower is acceptable and that there would be headroom there, but if you look forward, right against the eaves of the building, you have a toilet and wash basin, which are completely unusable, I would have thought.
So I've just popped up on the screen the existing plans. This is an existing shower room, so it's currently being used by the existing residents. So I mean, I'm not sure if I have a photograph of that shower room. I've got a lot of photographs you can see. I'm trying to remember which is which. Unfortunately, these are not annotated. I will ask the case officer if he can recall which one is which. But that gives you an illustration. I think that's because there are only the 3 bathrooms and 1 toilet, and so obviously we've got the various shower rooms there. I think that's the same shower room there, and that might be the same shower room there, so I might not have a photograph of that. I will ask the case officer to clarify whether they have a photograph of that. But as I say, this is an existing shower room, so by definition is usually being used by 3 to 6 residents already.
And if it wasn't usable, presumably the same logic as you've used before, which is that could be having the 3 separate shower rooms, lavatories, is over our standards anyway, and could be discounted. Is that right?
Yes and no. So again, it's that planning is not a numbers game. We chase ourselves down this rabbit hole quite a lot. What we're looking at is overall the quality of that living environment. So to take us back to the floor plan, the requirement for both the 6-bed and a 7-bed HMO, it's exactly the same numbers requirement, is to provide 2 showers, bathrooms, and associated WC. So obviously we've got 3 here. 2 of them are limited. One is a little bit small compared to the 2.74 requirement on the ground floor, and one, while physically large enough, and you can see the access door on this slide, physically large enough, is impeded over some of its area by that reduced height. But overall, those what we've got is 4 toilets and 3 shower rooms, which is substantively above, in a numerical sense, the requirements. The fact that 2 of them are a little bit pokey, to be blunt, is, in officer's opinion, not a sufficient reason to withhold plan permission, as collectively it creates an appropriate and adequate living environment for future residents. Obviously, particularly highlighting the fact that this is an existing layout, an existing HMO for 6 people, and all that's actually changing is that bedroom 7, what is currently a study. Whether it's used for a study or not, absolutely anyone's guess, of course, but that ground floor rear room that has no general utility, I would suggest, becoming an additional bedroom, and consequently to suggest, now members have concluded plan permission is required in this case, that the overall living environment is so detrimental to withhold plan permission, bearing in mind, as I referenced earlier, that presumption in favour that does support and weight in favour of granting additional accommodation would be, I think, a difficult one to argue in light of the adopted policies that you have.
Steve.
Thanks, Judith. Ian, these plans are a little bit unusual. Can I just check before I stick my hand up in one way or the other that there are windows in this property?
Yes, there. The bedroom 4 and the shower room. Unfortunately, I don't have an image to help us too much here, I don't think. I'm not sure we can see it in any of the photographs.
Bedroom 4 I could see, because that's where the eave height drops.
Yeah, so they're served by Velux windows.
So bedroom 7, 3, 6. What about bedroom 2? Where's the window for that? And bedroom 5? Because there's very little outside wall space.
Yeah, so again, absolutely not great plans. Obviously, bedroom 2 windows here. On that basis, bedroom 3 on the back, same for 5 and 6, bedroom 7 on the back there, 1 front windows, bedroom 4, and served by a Velux window, is my understanding. Again, I will ask the case officer to confirm that.
That's a relief. At least it's not a bunker.
John.
Yeah, thank you, Judith. I was going to say the same as Steve, actually. I was going to ask about the windows, because also about the venting, and I could see, particularly on that bathroom, I mean, I can see they're in good condition, but I was going to ask about the venting of the dampness between those bedroom 2 and bedroom 1, if there's no windows in that. I can see venting on some of the others, but I can't see anything on that. But the windows and the pictures were a help. Thank you.
Yeah, for the venting point, so we don't have details of how the first floor bathroom is vented. Obviously, it'd have to be by ductwork, as it has no external walls through there. Again, that's where building control takes over from a planning point of view. They would clearly, it is a requirement, both actually for your private sector housing team and for the building control approval to provide appropriate ventilation to bathrooms.
Can we move on to comments and recommendations?
Apologies, just got an update from the case officer. Bedroom 4 is served by 2 Velux windows, just to be absolutely clear. We do have a photo that can be emailed over, but then I'm not sure I'll give that to you. But 2 Velux windows in that front roof serving bedroom 4.
I'll just fill a little bit of time on this. And if we were to approve this, We would have the usual three or four conditions attached to that, the SPD, the timescale, and the approved plans, as amended by the second set of plans that you've got.
Would that also include bike rack provision, cycle storage provision?
If members feel a condition for bike storage is required, we can put the standard bike store condition on, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, that would be a good idea. Well then, just to get us going, I'll propose that recommendation. Again, with a slightly heavy heart, I'll propose that we give it permission subject to those four
Chair,
conditions.
I think we've gone straight into comments without taking a vote on whether or not it's development under section 55 yet.
No, I did that earlier. Sure I did. Did I not? I really thought we had.
Well, no, no one's shouting at me, so I assume I'm right.
Apologies, I have to agree with our legal advisor. I'm not sure we have. However, I would anticipate the wording that Councillor Pitter suggested may be used to apply here, and it may be possible just to progress with silent affirmation of that rather than having to do that circle again. Yeah.
Kieran's going to disagree with you because it needs to come as a member proposal from the floor, I suspect. Is that right?
Sorry, something
It doesn't
about
matter.
acclamation as to whether or not it's development.
I'll
Just
tidy it
take
up.
a vote
I'll
on
tidy it up for
development,
you. I'm
please.
happy
Yeah.
to
Let's do it.
propose that we consider this as in need of planning permission on the basis of the same wording that I proposed for the previous two applications. Then we need to vote on that, and then we can have a vote on the actual application.
I apologise, I was quite certain we'd done that.
I will second that.
So, shall we have a vote on whether or not it needs planning permission, and we have a proposal that it does, subject to those conditions? Thank you, Kieran.
Thank you.
Is that all right? No, that was the proposal, though, that it needed planning permission. Yes. And now we're going over to ask the question about, I have proposed that, with a somewhat heavy heart, but I've proposed that we should grant planning permission, having decided we needed it, subject to the conditions that we have identified, that we did in the previous discussion.
Councillor Pitt then asked for a bike store condition, so in this case,
Yes.
subject to your willingness to accept that amendment, it would be four
Bike
conditions.
store, amended plans, SPD, and timescales. Yeah. Do I have a seconder for that? John, thank you.
Happy to second it.
Okay. Anybody wanting an alternative recommendation? So I propose that we move to a vote to grant planning permission subject to those four conditions. Would you like to raise your hands, please? That's 4. Raise your hands if you're against. 3. So we've granted, with a heavy heart as sometimes, planning permission for that application. Thank you. Now, 243 Fawcett Road, I think, has been withdrawn.
Yes, to be
Is that
clear,
right?
243 Fawcett Road, application 20-01328/FUL has been withdrawn by the applicant and thus does not need consideration today.
So we're going to move straight on to 35 Bailey's Road, where we have...
Chair, could Ian clarify as to why it's been withdrawn? Originally, the application came in January, February 2021. And what I don't want is the applicant then to still appeal for non-determination because they've withdrawn an application. So,
It's been withdrawn because they wrote us a letter saying we'd like to withdraw our application. Their alternative would have been to appeal for non-determination, and indeed that was available to them. They haven't progressed that. A withdrawn application is therefore dead.
okay. But they haven't given you a reason why?
They may well have done. I don't have the reason. Obviously, It's not relevant to what I need to know. Yeah.
Thank you, Ian.
I was longing for us to have a discussion about what a private outdoor amenity space is, and apparently it's not just a garden, it was a balcony. So we're moving on to 35 Bailey's Road. We have one deputy who I think is not here. Is Emma Blackburn here? No, okay. So we'll proceed with this on the same basis as other applications and ask Ian to introduce this to us. This one is not an appeal, I think. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is one of the two that isn't currently at appeal, so it's just a normal application to be determined in the normal way. In this case, the 7th bedroom is achieved by a second floor study conversion, so there's the building, a number of HMOs in the area, as laid out in the report. It is this study, apologies, quite a small plan, here up on the second floor, currently shown to be a study that will now become a 7th bedroom, as you can see. There, again, we have some mocked up images, photographs of these are actual photographs of the site and the quality of how it's been delivered.
Could I ask you to speak up a little bit? I notice you get quieter and quieter through a meeting, and we're getting to that point.
No comment. So in this case, the bedrooms, there's a couple over 10 metres, several below 10 metres, so should plan permission be required, and to be clear, officers clearly recommend it does not. The larger amenity space, in this case, a combined kitchen diners provided, which is 34.07, being a number larger than 34, so fully compliant with your policy on space standards, and obviously has no impact on the balance and mix of the number of HMOs within the relevant area.
Chair, can I just ask, when Ian says mocked up pictures, are they as the rooms look, or have they been mocked up with superimposed pictures?
I believe these are actual photographs. I think obviously they've been laid out for estate agent purposes, but they are real photographs, not CGI.
Shall we then move to the first decision, which is whether or not this requires a planning application? Do I have somebody to move a motion accordingly?
Yes, just so we don't all lose the will to live.
Thank you, Steve.
Quite happy to suggest that the wording that I applied to a previous application in whether or not it required planning permission is relevant in this case too, albeit that I am applying it independently and separately and relevant particular to this application. Is that all right, Kieran?
It really is easier if you just read it out verbatim each time.
I can do. It's just that Ian said he wanted it at the end anyway. But I will, for clarity, say that due to the intensity of the use of accommodation, the impact on parking, waste, amenity, impact upon neighbouring residents, and the impact on the 7th Special Protection Area, the changes considered in this case on its own individual merits amounts as development requiring planning permission.
Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Darren. Unless there's an alternative perspective on this, would you raise your hands if you agree to that recommendation? That's agreed then. Let's move on to considering, now that we've agreed that it will be, does require a planning application, let's move on to look at whether we think that should be granted or not. Ian, do you want to say anything else? Or have you covered that in your introduction?
No, I think it's adequately covered. Obviously, this is a straightforward one in the sense that all rooms do meet your standards and consequently doesn't have some of the complexities that we've seen in some of the previous discussions.
Any questions on the designs? Darren?
Thanks, Judith. So it's not clear, Ian, what the nature of the en-suites actually are. Can you give further clarification of that? It's not totally clear from the illustrations.
They're all shower rooms, I think, without exceptions. Looking at the submitted plans, the 4 central bedrooms, which, when you look at the plans on page 48 or 32, 1, 2, 3 and 4 all have linear en suites with square shower cubicles to the left, toilets on the internal party wall on the right. Bedroom 6 has an en suite with a quarter circle shower. Bedroom 7 doesn't have an ensuite, but there is an additional shower room on that second floor landing. So in effect, would be the, one would assume, not necessarily the sole province, but certainly the only one who doesn't have his own toilet and shower would be using that bathroom. And bedroom 5 on the first floor has an ensuite with a quarter circle shower as well as an additional toilet on that central part next to the stairwell on the first floor.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Steve?
Ian, we're seeing quite a lot of rebandings by the Evaluation Office Agency at the moment where HMOs, where in particular where there is an increased level of amenity for the resident beyond just having a bedroom, and in this instance every room bar one, which would still be able to claim that it had its own bathroom, has an ensuite, and therefore I would suggest that if this is granted planning permission, there's a very high likelihood indeed that it will be subsequently rebanded by the VOA for reasons that I've discussed with you at length. Can you explain why there is this incongruity between on one side saying that this doesn't actually constitute a material change in the use of any buildings or land, and yet the Valuation Office Agency are saying it is a material change to the extent that they're rebanding this. So instead, for the benefit of colleagues who may not know, in an HMO, the landlord currently would receive a council tax bill and the tenants would pay inherently a contribution towards that bill as part of their rent, kind of built in. What's now happening is the landlord is not being asked to pay the bill, the tenants are, and every single one of these rooms is very likely to be rebanded to Band A and receive an individual council tax bill, possibly counted back several years to when other people lived there. And it's something that I'm very cross about, and there are a lot of other people cross about it as well. I have long played out this, and it is clear that whilst it is legal, it is very strange. But I'm just asking for clarification between that material change that we're being asked not to see in planning terms, but the Valuation Office Agency is saying that it's not only a change, it's so material, albeit not in planning terms, that they are rebanding the property as 7 individual Band A dwellings and using the hereditament rules to overplay that criteria above the definition of self-contained, and that is putting us in a really conflicted position here to say at one end of the spectrum it's not a big deal, other people can just move in, and yet if they do and the building's been converted to have all these en suites on it, the Valuation Office Agency is going to say this is actually now 7 individual dwellings. It seems to me completely mad.
And with apologies to my colleague on the right, the law is an ass, yes. This is a definitional issue, to be blunt. It's the difference between self-contained dwelling house and hereditament. Different legislative and regulatory regimes applying different rules. They simply don't speak to each other in a very considerate way, to be blunt. To give you a practical example that may illustrate why it's not relevant, rather than specifically answer the question, because I can't speak for the Valuation Office. The Valuation Office looks at, as you say, a degree of change since the original dwelling. One of the fundamental underpinning points, and this predates the current council tax system, we're going back, 50 years probably, is really whether or not it's capable of becoming a dwelling house in a family house sense, if you made sufficient change to it, such that it can't, easily convert back to what people would normally understand to be a dwelling house. That obviously is recognising that it has changed. The purpose of the council tax system is obviously to, like all taxation, to be blunt, is to extract betterment from the private individual for the benefit of the wider society. So where a landlord, and I'll use a different example than the one here, though you can translate it yourselves easily enough, I'm sure. If a landlord had a 5-bedroom HMO That is a single dwelling house under planning law. Everyone agrees and recognises that. It's a C4 HMO if you wish to refer to the use class law. Doesn't particularly help you, but that would be a straightforward question. If those 5 people living together were sharing 1 or 2 bathrooms, clearly it would be very and eminently easy to convert back into, and indeed in most places you could do so under permitted development, convert back into a dwelling house, a C3 dwelling house, and the Valuation Office considers this and would not, I would suggest, it is a personal opinion I must stress, would not divide that into 5 separate herediments. If that landlord chose to make internal alterations to the dwelling to create 5 ensuite bathrooms, maybe put an additional upstairs kitchen in for the benefit of those residents that didn't want to walk so far, the conversion of that new building, still a 5-bed HMO dwelling house in use class C4, that sufficient degree of change may well invite the Valuation Office to re-evaluate that and say, well, actually, these 5 bedrooms that now all have their own bathrooms and have greater access to this enhanced amenity space, none of which require planning permission, could be defined as 5 different herediments and be individually cast as Band A units. That's the nonsense, and no one would be batting an eyelid from a planning perspective that would or not require planning permission. Indeed, members, I would suggest you would applaud that landlord who has taken and for the benefit of his 5 residents massively improved the quality of their living environment and amenity. It applies exactly the same for 7 or 8. The simple fact is, of course, landlords rarely have a sound business case to make that conversion to an existing dwelling without needing to get more revenue out of it. And there's obviously an upper cap you can give to a single bedroom, whether it's en suite or not. So generally, we see the Valuation Office stepping in across the country to look at these things when there has been larger scale interventions, i.e. PD extensions that enables that to go from 5 to 6 to 7 to 8, and thus it's abnormally notable on applications that have a large number of bedrooms through those conversions, because that's when the landlords are choosing to make that investment. As I say, in a hypothetical scenario where a landlord made that investment without changing the number of bedrooms on a 4-bed HMO, it would be equally relevant and equally likely for the Valuation Office to make that change. It's a fundamental difference between the definition of a dwelling house and the definition of a hereditament under the local financial considerations that underpin the Valuation Office work. I can provide a 2-hour seminar on this should members wish, but that probably covers for you now.
Thank you, Ian. Yes, spare us the 2 hours at this stage, although the more one delves in this, the more inconsistencies there are, and that's a very, very difficult thing for us to handle here. Any more questions? Darren.
It's not a question, but it's just to say that there is also, following on from what Steve says, I'm getting landlords coming to me and saying what's going on here. It has been around for a while, so we know this may have come. And there's also legal precedent as well, which involves the conversion of a hotel into a HMO as well. And Ian is right, that from what I've seen, the legal judgment is around the change of use as to whether effectively we're dealing with a flat or not, because that's what we're talking about. The presence of an assured short hold tenancy, which is going to be very interesting, because that seems to be the only way you can get any tenancies nowadays, as opposed to the old covenant agreement that existed. And also the nature of the change. So the legal advice, if memory serves me right, involved having a kitchen, but sharing a toilet. Having a toilet, but not sharing a kitchen. So I think this is going to affect us going forwards, because effectively we may be granting HMO status for what are effectively going to be flats. And that has implications here, I think, and also for the wider HMO market in the city, because I could very easily see HMOs going down if this occurs more and more often, and this sort of development occurs more and more often. And it is important that we raise it here in a less confrontational arena than elsewhere. But it is a real problem, and there is legal precedent, and it's one of the things I think landlords really do have to look at, more than things like space standards or anything we do here.
Thank you, Darren. Any further questions? If not, I'll move on to comments and recommendation. Darren.
I recommend that we grant conditional planning permission for this development on the basis of, I'm going to say the three things that Ian said earlier that needs to be added. This meets our space, notwithstanding the previous discussion, this meets our space standards in every respect, in every room. And on that basis, we can't go against the amenity. What we should do is include the conditions and any bike storage conditions if they don't exist. Ian will type that up into planning speak, but I can't see why we can't put this through.
Is there a seconder for that? John, thank you very much. If there are no alternative points of view, can we move to a vote on granting planning permission for this development with the 4 conditions that we have, we would want to apply?
3
to
or
this?
4?
4 with the bike storage.
I believe the bike store is already in play. Obviously, your bike storage requirements are the same for 6 or 7, so they wouldn't be changing the bike store. I'll just ask the case officer to confirm that the bike store, which is shown on the existing plans, it's just the other side of the kitchen dining window, is already in place on site, so that condition wouldn't be necessary. Obviously, you can delegate that to me if you want me to clarify that feature, but the case officer has come forward and said yes, they do recall the bike store is already in place on site.
I think we'd be happy to delegate the decision to you, Chair, if everybody's happy with that. Can I move to a vote then and ask for you to raise your hands if you agree that it should be given conditional planning permission? Five. Any against? 1. Any abstentions? Thank you, Russell. I think you have the planning permission has been granted. Okay, let's move on then to the next application, which is 95 Castle Road. And after
Chair, sorry, just before we move on to that one, could I have a quick word with Councillor Fielding about the interest he declared earlier?
Do you want us to stop the meeting for a moment while you do that?
I don't think it'll take that long.
Okay, because I am proposing that we take, well, let's take, I was proposing a development break, a comfort break after the next item. So we'll take it now for 10 minutes then. 10 minutes comfort break. Thank you for reconvening. We are moving on with the application number 695 Castle Road. Yep. Which we have before us. Councillor Fielding.
Chair, I am aware of I professionally know the applicant, and as such, there's a prejudicial interest, and I will be leaving the meeting for this item.
Thank you. Look forward
having
to seeing you.
consulted with the planning solicitor.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We look forward to seeing you for the next item, following item. So, we have here no deputies, and we have to ask Ian Maguire to introduce it for us, please.
Thank you, Chair. 95 Castle Road, slightly different from other HMOs. We're talking upper floors of a commercial building. That's it there. A few HMOs in the area, somewhat different area that we've looked at previously. Very different layout and building than we've looked at previously with this masonette. We are creating these 2 additional bedrooms to go up to an 7-bed HMO from the current, I believe, 5 beds that are in there at the moment. A lounge and a study are being converted accordingly to show those 7 bedrooms. All of the rooms massively exceed your standards and have been they've got a private balcony out the front there. You can see the layout and what's down as a living room, clearly living dining. You can see bottom right image there, large rooms. I think that's the additional kitchen. There's 2 kitchens in this site as well across the site. So obviously very well provided for HMO. Again, advice from officers, plan permission not required, but otherwise, obviously, should members come to a contrary opinion, it does fully meet your standards for an HMO of this size.
Thank you. Shall we move first then to the question about whether or not the application requires a planning permission? Councillor Pitt.
Chair, happy to propose that due to the intensity of the use, the accommodation, the impact on parking waste amenity, impact on neighbouring residents and the impact on the Solent Special Protection Area, the changes considered in this case on its own individual merit amount to development requiring planning permission.
Is there anybody who could second that? Thank you, Darren. If there are no views to the contrary, I'll ask you to raise your hands if you agree with that recommendation. Thank you very much. We agree that this needs a planning application is necessary, and we'll move to the matter of whether or not we wish to grant it in this case. Ian has already explained to us that it meets our standards. Are there any other questions for him? Hugh.
Am I right in that there is no cycle provision available for this property?
I don't believe that is correct, no. If we can just put this slides back on the ground floor, there is bike stalls provided. Obviously, the layout's a little bit unusual. You come into from the rear here into this door into the lobby, and there is space for bike stalls on the ground floor of the building.
Thank you.
Russell.
Yes, thank you. This second kitchen on the proposed second floor, it's obviously greatly under. However, what's actually in it? I mean, do we see a picture of that, or did I miss it? Okay. So I'm guessing it's the bottom right corner, is that correct?
Yes, that must be. So unfortunately, again, not annotated, but yes, clearly
So
looking at the 2 kitchens, that's got to be the second kitchen. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Darren.
Whilst I agree with Russell that the second kitchen is the only thing that's small, is it one of those things that has to be provided, Ian? Or is it like the previous one whereby extra stuff was provided?
From a pure numerical sense, neither kitchen needs to be provided. Obviously, they have to provide the cooking facilities, but the living room is more than enough at 40 square metres to provide all the necessary amenity space. It's just how they're equipped. So those two additional rooms, the kitchen dining room at 22.2 and the kitchen at 7.4, are both, from a floor space point of view, in addition to the minimum requirements. So they are massively over-provided for floor space.
Any further questions? No, then I'll move to comments and recommendations. Hugh.
I think by far this is the best standard of accommodation we have seen this morning, and I would propose that this be granted planning permission subject to any of the usual conditions.
Is that seconded? John, thank you. Are we happy with the statement of the usual conditions, Ian?
On the basis that's time limit, approved plans and the SPA related conditions, yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. So subject to those two conditions, could you raise your hands if you want to approve the planning permission for this? Is anybody against? Are there any abstentions? Thank you. The planning permission is granted. Thank you. I hope the plans will show us where the front door was for that property, but I'm going to have a look when I'm next around there.
It's a very interesting property.
So I'd like to move on.
At the moment, Madam Chairman, you would have to go around a large amount of work in the road in order to get into it.
Yes, I believe that to be the case. Thank you. It's difficult to find. Item number 7 then, 98 Manners Road, we have before us. Could I ask, we have no, yes, Councillor Susie Horton was a deputy for this and wanted us to retain in our minds the points she made in for the previous applications. But first, could I ask Ian Maguire to introduce this application for us? Thank you. Oh, we've got George back. Good. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. A more traditional layout there, 98 Manor View there. There's the property, again, a mixture of HMOs and non-HMOs in the immediate surrounding area. In this case, the seventh bedroom is achieved through the conversion of the ground floor lounge to provide that additional bedroom. As you'll see from page 59, para 5.6, all the rooms meet your minimum sizes. A few of the rooms are just below the 10 square metres for a bedroom size, so they do require the larger combined living space of more than 34. They provide over 36 in this case, so all the standards are met on that basis, and consequently it will be a fully compliant scheme. If it requires plan permission, officer recommendation, of course, is that it does not.
Right, can I move to a decision about whether we need to consider and accept a planning application? Thank you, Councillor Pitt.
What are you going to do if I'm on holiday? Due to the intensity of the use of the accommodation, the impact on parking waste, amenity impact on neighbouring residents, the impact on the Solent Special Protection Area, the changes considered in this case on its own individual merits amounts to development requiring planning permission.
Is that seconded? Councillor Fielding. Good, thank you. Shall we move to, if there are no alternative proposals, can we move to a vote? Would you raise your hands if you agree with that? Thank you very much. We're agreed that this needs planning consideration as a planning application, and we'll move on to look at the decision whether we grant it or don't grant a grant. planning permission here. Any questions on that particular issue? This is an application where we've been assured that our standards are met under paragraph 5.6, and where there is the change of use from a lounge to a bedroom, but leaving the kitchen, dining space and other spaces compliant. Can we move towards a comments and a recommendation, please? Steve.
Thanks, Judith. Just for colleagues who may not be as familiar with Manners Road as I am, it is one of the roads in the city that's got on the high, as a road, not as the 50-metre radius in this particular application, but as a road, one of the highest densities of HMOs in the city. And if you've spoken to the residents down there as often as I have, you'll know that that does have a massive impact on their lives. Not least, and something that doesn't often get considered, is that because of the number of HMOs down that road, during the holiday, almost all of them are student-let, and during the periods of break from uni, so when uni's not sitting, it's the ghost town. And neighbours feel insecure and unsafe, and it increases the sense of isolation. And while there may not be a specific bit of planning law that covers that, although if there is, I'm sure it'll know, but it seriously does have an impact on them. And actually, it was neighbours from Manners Road were amongst those at the public inquiry that's referred to in the Campbell Properties decision, and were very passionate in making their case about the impact that this has on them. So I know we are where we are, but I think it is important to state that whatever we look at in planning terms, these are people's lives that are genuinely affected by the decisions that we make.
And that's particularly the case with a large number of student accommodations there, rather than necessarily the so-called professionals that are often occupying HMOs. Can we move towards a recommendation? Is anybody? Before we're talking about conditional recommendation with the SPA, has this got bicycle storage? Bicycle storage and the plans and the time limits.
If I may, Chairman, yes, there has a bicycle, so I was just quickly looking at the plans. It's already there, so we wouldn't need a further bike store condition in this case.
So the three conditions would apply. Okay, to save time, then I will move towards the recommendation that we approve this planning application with the three conditions that we've agreed can be put on it. And if anybody could second that, John, thank you very much. Are there any alternative proposals? If not, we'll move to a vote. Could you raise your hands if you're in favour of that recommendation? Thank you. Will you raise your hands if you're against that? And could you raise your hands if you're abstaining? Thank you. Planning permission is granted. We can now move on to number 70 Manners Road. It's again in the same street, and the Deputy, Susie Horton, who's been called to another meeting, would like everything that she said before to apply to our thinking about this application. Ian Maguire, could you first introduce it to us, please?
Certainly. So, very similar application again, 70 Manners Road, again an area where there's a number of HMOs, not too many down this end of the road. This body is achieving its 7th bedroom through the conversion of a second floor study, becoming a, as you can see there, second floor study, becoming a bedroom. Slightly bigger bedrooms, slightly smaller living space, therefore perfectly permissible, fully meets your standards on that basis for room sizes, and consequently would be fully compliant with policy. Should policy be applicable, officer's advice, of course, plan permission not required in this case.
So we have no deputation here, and indeed I don't think there are any objections. 6 neighbourhood letters were sent out, but no responses were received. So can I ask for any questions? We need to move to the... we need to move to... just that same thought came my way. So no, we just did that, didn't we? Okay.
It's because it's still Manners Road, it feels,
yeah. We have the recommendation and the proposal from Councillor Pitt, seconded by...
Do you want me, Kieran wants me to read it out?
Yep.
Due to the intensity of the use...
Thank you.
Yeah. Due to the intensity of the use of the accommodation, the impact on parking, waste, amenity impact on neighbouring residents and the impact on the Solent Special Protection Area, the changes considered in this case on its own individual merits amount to development requiring planning permission.
Can that be seconded, please? Thank you, Darren. Can I ask that we move to a vote? Could you all raise your hands in favour of that recommendation? Thank you. We all agree it needs planning permission. We'll all move on then to a discussion about the application. Are there first any questions about it? I think we went through this. Darren.
Thank you. I'm a bit confused about the title. It talks about the change of use for small HMO to allow occupation as a HMO with 7 occupants. Now, small HMO doesn't need a licence. You're looking at 3 or 4 people. That's the definition. Yeah, later on, it talks if it has a licence for up to 7 people. If that's true, it's small. It's not small. So I'm grateful to Ian and Kieran for clarification. Is this actually a small HMO, or is this actually got 7 people in it?
Yes.
It's one or the other.
No, it's not. You're using a small HMO definition derived from the Housing Act. This is the Planning Committee. A small HMO is up to 6 people, a C4 HMO from our sense. So this is a C4 6-bed HMO, which would be defined as a small HMO under the planning issue, rather than a larger sui generis petition, should we wish to apply the use classes order for the conversation.
It's the first time that wording has been used in a title I've seen, so that's why I was asking. The second thing is, given the higher percentage of HMOs in the 50-metre radius than even existed with 98 Manners Road, what was the percentage when it actually became a HMO, or is it one of those that's legally exempt from needing planning permission because it was so old? You've got a particular planning application, which is fine, which is April 21, and I'm guessing it wasn't a HMO in April 21, it was a HMO much longer. Did you know? Is it one of those that's legally exempt?
We'd have to go back and dig around. So it was certainly my feeling was likely it is one of those because it obviously sought to update its status from, so it created the dual class opportunity in 21, meaning it benefited it for probably the previous 10 years in any case.
The reason I'm asking for newbies and those who are interested is that one of the problems local people often have is they often say to people, look, there's a HMO here and you don't know it exists. And one of the problems is that actually some of the HMOs are so old that nobody actually needed to know they existed in the first place, which is a problem in trying to find out how many HMOs there are.
I think we have asked that question quite often in the past, and I know that their planning department do work very carefully to find HMOs. This one isn't one of those because we had a planning history on it. Any further? Steve?
Having looked at the documents, we are on 70 manners, aren't we? It says it was C4 and that the application was to change it from C3, C4. So it's still going from C4 to SUI, and because it was already in existence as a C4. So.
Thank you. If there are no more questions then, I'll move on to asking for comments and recommendation. Steve?
Yeah, similar comment to something that I made earlier, that it does worry me that these, what I would regard as better quality HMOs, where they have ensuite bathrooms and they have good standard of communal space, what we're going to see with these rebandings that are happening is landlords less likely to do that. Because if, as we heard from Ian earlier on, that adaptations to a property and the level of them, even if they're done within PD, can influence the VOA in making that decision as to whether it could be a family dwelling again in future, etc., etc. So when they're every room in the house pretty much, apart from the kitchen, has an ensuite, clearly there's a good case to be made that that's not the case and it couldn't become a family dwelling. So what we're going to see more of going forward is exactly what we've been trying to fight against, which is more and more HMOs that don't have ensuite bedrooms and don't have the best level of amenity, because they'll be trying to keep that flexibility to argue to the VOA and a tribunal that it could go back to being a family dwelling, because once that rebanding happens, it's flipping difficult to get it changed again. So the other consideration here is that tenants pay an envelope of overhead, so they know what money they've got to go to their bills. So it doesn't matter whether it's going towards their rent or their council tax, that's their bills. So this will push landlords to stop doing the type of improvements that myself and quite a few other members of the planning committee have spent 7 years arguing the case for and fighting for improvements for. So I just wanted to highlight that element of it that I didn't earlier, but it's really key to the situation we're in now. Because I know some people think, why do we sit here arguing about these things when there are fag papers in the law over whether or not we can even decide on them? But actually, they are really big issues, and the fact that government continually refuses to consider them is just unacceptable.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with you, and I think it will be useful to further bring together not just licensing and planning, but also to look at the point of view of the valuers and valuation office on this, because it's a whole package of things that affects the quality, the affordability, and indeed the amenities that are provided. So perhaps we could, you could take it up to the Cabinet to suggest such a...
Chair, I've already raised it with the 2 local members of Parliament, and we have an appeal going to government to try and get an amendment to the Levelling Up Act. I don't think we can do much more apart from spend many hours torturing ourselves by talking about why this doesn't work.
Good, thank you. I think that's useful. Anybody willing to put a recommendation to us? Well, again, with a very slightly heavy heart, I'll recommend that we give this application approval, subject to the 3 conditions that we have already raised: the SPD, the plans, and the SPA, the plans and the timescale. And are we okay on bicycle storage here? Yes, and we have got bicycle storage already. So I would like to propose that we grant planning permission. Anybody second that? John, thank you very much. Are there any alternative views? If so, we'll go to a vote. Could you all raise your hands if you agree to granting planning permission subject to the conditions? Could you raise your hands if you want to refuse planning permission for this? Thank you. And if you want to abstain? 2 abstentions. Okay. Thank you. I think we've granted planning permission. So can I move on now to item 9, 1 Garnier Street. Members who've been around a long time, as I have, will remember that this Garnier Street was once in past history the large number of the properties there with the South Sea Housing Co-op. which were moved in there when the Holbrook Road was developed. So, could I ask, there are no deputies for this and no resident representations. Ian, could I ask you to introduce this application, please? Oh,
Sir.
do we need? Yes, we have voted here.
Well, we'll come to that in a second. So, yes, 1 Garnier Street, there's the property. You can see it has changed over the years to its current layout. Not many HMOs in the immediate vicinity here. A slightly unusual layout you can see with the floor plans, taking you through to the proposed floor plans there. In this case, the 7th bedroom is created by the ground floor lounge conversion. Despite that conversion, as you can see from page 71 or 55, the scheme meets all criteria for room standards with, in this report, the exception of the en-suites in bedroom 6 and bedroom 7. The applicant has reorientated those, effectively gives you slightly less width of walls, so they've just squeaked in now. We've checked those. We have a different layout of the bathrooms between bedroom 6 and bedroom 7, so now they do meet your space standards, as you can see in the plan on the screen now, so it's fully compliant with your space standards. The table looks at the minimum necessities here, and as you can see, they've all been met. I would flag, which isn't in the table but is covered in the SMAT, there's some additional amenity spaces also provided for within the scheme. Primarily, we've got a utility space, as it's been described. In fact, it's that first floor bathroom, so first floor toilet room is actually also a laundry. So there's an additional laundry utility on the first floor, which is obviously worth noting. We also have, somewhat unusually, and you can see in the bottom left of this image, an applicant's intention, which hasn't yet been built, so it would require a condition, should permission be required and granted, to provide not just a bike store, but also a workspace, illustrated here as a home office provision at the rear of the property, to provide an additional usable space for future residents. Obviously, home working, more common now than it ever has been, and that additional space provided for residents' benefits on this illustrated drawing as well. So that's above and beyond requirement, so it may not need to be conditioned to be delivered, but worth noting. And then finally, just as a point of clarification, on that second floor, bedroom 2 up there also has a walk-in wardrobe, some additional space therefore you can add in square meterage to bedroom 2, which is already a pretty large bedroom in any case. So fully meets your standards across all rooms, plus a few extra amenities for residents individually and collectively. Again, however, plan permission not required in the recommendation of officers.
So we first need to move to deciding whether or not planning permission is required here, and do I have a proposal one way or the other? Thank you, Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Judy. I'd like to propose that due to the intensity of the use of the accommodation, the impact on parking, waste, amenity impact on neighbouring residents, and the impact on the Solent Special Protection Area, the changes considered in this case on its own individual merits amount to development requiring planning permission.
Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Russell. In the absence of any alternative proposals, I will move to a vote and ask you to raise your hands in favour of that decision that it does require planning permission. Thank you. So we'll now move on to consider whether or not to grant planning permission for this scheme, and any questions about the amenities size and other matters to do with the planning application. Steve.
Chair, with respect and with the indulgence of colleagues, I think we should go straight to a vote on this one to approve it, because it's 5.7, it is under the 10% rule. There was millimetres here, or centimetres at most in any of these space standards. It's got a good quality of accommodation, and apart from the call-in, it never would have appeared in front of us in the first place. It is clearly acceptable and policy compliant, so I'd like to move the officer's recommendation. And
you're moving the officer's recommendation subject to conditions?
The usual ones, yes.
The
SPA, cycle storage. Well, they've got more than cycle storage. So, yeah.
Then I'm going to ask for a seconder. Darren, thank you.
I would happily second this, but with one question, if I may, which is that a dormer was refused previously. I don't know whether the dormer is needed in order to get the building to be as it is now.
No, that was an opportunity to expand the building, which was refused and has not been built and is not part of this scheme, and nor necessary to meet the floor spaces described in this proposal.
Thank you. With that, I'm happy to second Steve's proposal.
Okay, then I'll move to a vote approving this planning permission subject to the 3 conditions. Can I have a show of hands of those in favour? Thank you. Could I have a show of hands of anybody against? None. Could I have a show of hands for anybody abstaining? Thank you, Russell. The planning permission is granted. Now I'm moving on to 178 Walmer Road. And we have here no deputies, and indeed there were no representations received from members of the public about this. Ian, would you proceed to introduce this to us?
Yes, one verbal update to the SMAT. While we've been in here, it has been confirmed that this application is now validated. So again, your ability to determine it has been superseded by the Secretary of State. So this is now another would have made determination rather than an actual application. So moving feast there.
Should we therefore proceed, or?
Absolutely. So this is the same as 54 Sheffield and 13 Shadwell. Okay. We still need to know what you would have decided so that we can inform the statement of case. I'll take you through the plans and then flag another issue in just a second. Where are we? Yep, 178 Walmer. There's the property. As you can see, fewer HMOs in this area. That is the existing plans. The 7th bedroom is created to a ground floor lounge conversion to achieve the increased occupancy. They were the submitted plans and are the plans that you see in your agenda. They have been updated by the applicant to correct I think a technical drawing error. The eagle-eyed amongst you would have spotted a small variation in that this showed the wall coming straight on that party wall. Actually, there's a slight step in associated with that layout now. The challenge associated with that is my team have taken some further measurements on this scheme and have raised with me a slight concern by email that the floor space is no longer the described 34.01 but maybe 32.64 below the standard on that basis. So unfortunately this is information that's come up since this amended drawing. Obviously it doesn't in any way change the officer recommendation as the scheme is not considered to need planning permission. And I don't wish to say with certainty because the team is feeding this information as I sit here and there's been a fire alarm gone off in the civic offices so they've all had to leave their desks now. So I'm unable to get any further update at the moment, but there is a slight concern with that updated drawing, which we obviously referenced within our update today, that the shared amenity space may be slightly smaller than the requisite 34. As I say, from an officer point of view, no change for our recommendation, as it's not considered to require planning permission, but one for members to bear in mind.
Chair, with permission, could it, because these drawings are really small, and on there they're blurry as hell. Ian, could you confirm the dimension on the left-hand wall where it steps back in the living space by the dining room table, between there and the rear wall, because I can't read that figure. I can see the 6.37 for the bit that's south of it, but I can't read that figure. It's 5 point something.
So the upper part's 5.48, but so that's stepped in slightly in the blurry images we have here. But obviously, we're down to how far it's stepped in and what thickness of wall we're looking at is what's dictating this variation.
Well, yeah, but we know it from these drawings. We don't need anybody to tell us, because there's a width at the south end of the communal space of 2.85, so we can see the difference. So 2.85 times 6. Whatever that is, gives us 18.15, and then the rear bit times 2.59, which is the measurement of that. If you add the two together, it comes to 32.34, so it is under. Unless you want to disagree with me.
So that's exactly the same figure that we're currently sketching, but so that's what we've been able to base on, obviously a non-annotated drawing, so to try and imply the annotation which acknowledges to be a faulty plan. This is the submitted drawing that we've been asked to judge upon because it is more accurate, but doesn't have those annotations, so I can't guarantee it's 32.34. It is more than likely that it's not, but obviously that's a factor that we can either defer the matter today, which would remove your ability as a committee therefore to comment on the application, or make a judgment on it. I would say, as you are not determining the application, you're simply making your guidance, it is perfectly plausible for you to conclude almost both ways, having decided whether or not it requires plan permission, which you're still to do. If you're minded to say, actually, we would have approved it if it was 34, but we would have refused if it was 32. As a pure hypothetical, obviously that is guidance I can take from you as a committee, and having confirmed exactly what it is, once we have the opportunity to do so, ensure we inform our written statement to the inspectorate accordingly.
It would make it 1.66 metres squares deficient.
Chair, can I just ask Ian, what's going on the ground floor as you come through the front door? The two bedrooms there, on the plan it looks different to what it is on the, you've got boxes go over the doorways and things. I just wonder what's going on there.
Yes, so in that front hallway you've got three doors on the right, a bedroom and then a toilet, and then another bedroom, and that upper bedroom, which I believe is bedroom 2, has a wardrobe in between the two walls. The various boxes and things are illustrations of furniture, which obviously are less relevant to planning, but necessary often for licensing purposes.
But you wouldn't be putting furniture in front of doorways, would you?
No.
That could well be boxing and ducting above head height or something, as you say. It is not a boxing out of the room. It is a rectangular room on that basis. So yeah, an unfortunate illustration upon that. That bedroom does meet your minimum size standard, well below 10, but obviously 6.51 being your minimum size standards, and yes, some confusing illustration on the ground on the plans there. But so I'd have to simply beg your indulgence to overlook the technical drawer's errors there.
Your concern is where would you put the bed, is it?
Yeah, I was just seeking clarity on that, because it did seem that I just wondered what was going on with the furniture where it was in front of doorways and things. That was all.
Thank you. Any further questions? Right. Well, let's move to. Oh, sorry, Darren. Thank you.
That's right. Ian, just for my clarification, coming back to the earlier changes that you talked about, those changes were made by the applicant after the appeal was lodged for non-determination. Is that correct? Because it sounds as if they just happened, so that's after the appeal.
Obviously, they happened a number of weeks ago, but I think the appeal was lodged at the beginning of the month, so it would have been roughly contemporaneous. I wouldn't be surprised if, upon producing their pack for the appeal, they identified what is clearly a drawing error, that they've not inset the wall properly and thus updated their plans accordingly.
Okay. Thank you.
So, shall we move first to decide whether or not we're going to decide that this needs planning permission?
Yeah, all right, we'll come back to this. This drawing's a bit odd.
Yeah. Should we decide whether it needs planning permission first, and then we can move on to discussion of the details? Thank you, Steve.
Happy to propose that due to the intensity of the use of the accommodation, the impact of parking waste, amenity impact upon neighbouring residents and the impact on the Solent Special Protection Area, the changes considered in this case on its own merit amounts to development requiring planning permission.
Does anybody agree to second that?
But I have cards made up with that on it.
Thank you, Hugh. So we'll move then to a vote on that, deciding that it does need planning permission, unless there are any contrary views. Would you raise your hands if you think it does need planning permission? Thank you very much. So we'll move now to comment on and ask questions about the planning permission that we're about to consider.
If I may answer Councillor Pitt's question, yes, there are 7 bathrooms, just not en suite.
But they're on very odd floors. You've got one, the second floor has got 4 bathrooms and only 2 bedrooms. Okay.
If I may assist, I could see you formulating that question. As I mentioned earlier, this is the key thing I would say for planning. It differs from licensing on this basis quite strongly. It's an application of judgment. It's the quality of the overall living environment. Obviously, they could strip out probably 5 of these bathrooms and still be compliant with policy, converting all of that floor space into communal amenity space of various different kinds, thus massively exceeding the 34 square metres. We're at 32, as we've discussed earlier. Would that make a more livable space? Would that make a better home for residents? That's the judgment, in some ways, you're looking to apply. It's making that holistic judgment of, is this an adequate issue, recognising that 32 is a smaller number than 34, but as I say, they have far more, one would assume inevitably, these bathrooms would be assigned to rooms, albeit in a somewhat odd way, but that's how the tenancy arrangement would inevitably be created. So it has a high quality of amenity on that basis. It's just a different form of layout that obviously you wouldn't necessarily legislate for, because you wouldn't have anticipated someone choosing to lay out an HMO in this form.
With respect to Ian, you could make an Ealing comedy about people living in this house.
You could. 8 bathrooms for 7 people. Any further questions? We move on to comments and recommendations, bearing in mind that this one does have substandard communal space. Darren.
Judith, given that actually we're not determining this, but we're essentially offering advice to the planning inspectorate, can I suggest that we don't make a recommendation, but what we do offer as advice to the planning inspectorate is that if the combined living space had stayed at 34.01 square metres, that the committee would have approved the application. But that based on the information we have in front of us now, that the committee would have refused this application on the grounds of substandard amenity space.
Would we be...
And by the way, approved with the various additions that were added earlier on, things like nitrates and 1 years and all those sorts of things.
Would that be a route you'd advise, or if we would have refused it anyway, given that we know it's substandard communal accommodation, would we be better not to refuse it outright to start with? Both will give the inspector the same advice. We're asking what would be the most appropriate thing to do.
So it's incumbent upon us to give what this decision we would have made. The best available information I can give you at the moment, and apologies it is phrased in that way, is it is 32 point whatever, so it's below 34. Not far below 34, but below 34. If you are satisfied that that is so substandard that you would have withheld planning permission, having determined that planning permission is required in this case, then that can be the decision you can make and pass through to officers. Clearly, it would be of interest to me to know if, had it been 34.01, that you would have granted, obviously with standardised conditions, because if the applicant is able to clarify, because this is a product of drawing error, so I don't wish to be too reliant on new drawing when we know we've already got a flawed source. If they're able to clarify to the satisfaction officers it is 34, and then, to be blunt, clearly in producing the appeal statement I will be saying it is my opinion that the committee would have granted it, because I haven't heard anything to the contrary. Effectively exactly what you said, Councillor Sanders, but just the other way round. But clearly it would be good to hear the committee's deliberations upon that.
I mean, I would be happy to amend my suggestion so that we would have approved this if is then added as an informative, only approved with the additional conditions, is added as an informative at the bottom, which may be sort of formalising what Ian has suggested. Because Steve's right, we want people to live in decent-sized accommodation. We have space standards for a reason. If it's 0.01, as it is with one or two of them, that's just a first-tier tribunal issue, frankly. Whether doors open or not is something that's discussed at tribunal level. But something like this is significant and could significantly cut the amenity of people living there. So therefore I propose that we refuse what Ian has presented to us, which is not the papers, but on the grounds of the reduced communal living space, with an informative added at the bottom that the committee would have been minded to approve the application if the figures on the table in 5.6 had been stuck to.
Well, we can do that, or would we have to have effectively two decisions?
If I may say, piece of pedantry, yes, you can. It wouldn't be an informative because we're not producing a decision notice. You're not making a decision. It would be the minutes of the meeting, and if that is the resolution of the meeting, it is for officers to translate those minutes into an appeal statement. So if that was voted upon now, that would be a case. And if the applicant was then to come forward and demonstrate in their appeal submission that it is 34 or more, we will be able to say with confidence to the inspector that the committee would have granted this, because that's what you've said. So it's just a translation of the minutes. That's the role of officers in creating those statements of case.
I have a deputy waving at me, but I don't think we can take another. Okay, well, if we seem to be good, we'll ask you to tell us what you'd like to say.
So the communal space is 32 point, the smaller of the two measurements, only due to an issue with the building on the neighbour's party wall. We generally like to avoid the gaps between neighbours' extensions because it's open to water ingress and we'll build as close as. In this case, we couldn't, so we've come out a little bit. Does that make that slightly smaller? But just to point out, if he removed all the en-suites and put your minimum shower rooms in there, all the bedrooms would be over 10 and he would only need to provide 22.5, but taking away some of the amenity. So I think that's something that should probably be sort of bear in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, that's useful, it's helpful. We have a proposal then to produce a minute which says that if the space had been over 34...
Chairman, if I may, that would no longer be necessary. If we are satisfied and say my officers have given the 32.34, Councillor Pitt's calculation in the meeting gave 30.34 and the agent has confirmed it is 32.34, there's therefore no uncertainty left. if 32.34 is unacceptable, obviously the agent has taken the opportunity to explain why you may not wish to consider that that's unacceptable, and officers, I think, would give due regard to that. But if nevertheless members feel that is unacceptable, then it would have refused, and there is no further complexity. If, however, you feel that, no, yes, it is slightly substandard, but the excess bathrooms outweigh that, we would have granted it, then it would have been a would have granted. I don't think we need the either-or variability anymore.
Okay, no, thank you. Right, that's good. Can I ask for a recommendation then? Darren?
My proposal of 10 minutes ago still stands.
That's the one without the alternatives in, just saying refuse it because it's...
Yes, and it would be noted in the minutes that if it had been of a suitable standard, the committee would have been minded to approve the application.
Is there a seconder for that? To Councillor Atwell, thank you. Do we have an alternative proposal?
Before you go to the vote, Chair, I would say obviously if you are looking to a would have refused, we would obviously be wanting to make sure we reference the would have also refused for the lack of current nitrates position. It'll be washed out on the appeal process, but worth capturing for the minutes as well.
Yep. Thank you very much. So subject to those reasons, which is lack of amenity space up to our standards and the lack of an SPA mitigation.
Seconder? Got a seconder for that?
I had a seconder, Chris Atwell. Yep. So would you are there any alternative recommendations? If not, please will you raise your hands if you'd like to refuse this application on those grounds. Are there any people who would like to have given planning permission or disagree? Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Thank you. And you'll convey that to the inspector as soon as you can while they're looking at it. Good. Okay, we're now moving to 13 Shadwell Road, which has been added in as a late matter. I understand it was an error in compiling the papers that led to this to being delayed. Do you all want a couple of minutes to read it?
If I'm allowed, I'm happy to read it, considering Henry normally would have come, but because of the nature of the last minute, I'm more than happy to read the deputation if that's okay. You were going to read Henry Thorpe's deputation. That's correct.
But first, do we need to have a time to read the... Sorry? It's agenda item 14, 13 Shadwell Road. Can everybody make sure they have a copy of it? Looks like this. And I am going to therefore give you a couple of minutes to speed read it. It's the last item on the agenda, and we should... It's in Hilsea Ward. So if you perhaps all look up at me in bright faces when you've read it. If you could look at me when you have read it, that'd be good. Okay now, Darren. Thank you. I think we've all had a chance to read it. Thank you very much. Could I ask Ian to introduce this to us, please?
Thank you. Sheffield Road, so there is the property. We are creating our 7th bedroom in this case through a ground floor lounge conversion. It's the central building on the left-hand floor plan. You see the central room on the left-hand floor plan. You see here that becomes bedroom 7. Otherwise, no significant changes to the internal layout. The room sizes all meet your minimum requirements as described in paragraph 5.7 of the supplementary report, in addition to combined living space that meets that lower 22.5 because they're all large bedrooms. There is a further study on the rear of the property, 16 square metres. On that basis, it would be fully compliant with your policy. If plan permission was required, obviously the officer's recommendation is that it does not.
Okay, let's move to the decision where we decide whether or not this does require planning permission. Officer's recommendation that it does not, but would anybody like to propose something to the contrary?
You look straight at me, Judith.
Thank you very much.
You are hoping I might facilitate that. Due to the intensity of the use of the accommodation, the impact on parking, waste, amenity impact on neighbouring residents, and the impact on the Solent Special Protection Area, the changes considered in this case on its own individual merits amounts to development requiring planning permission.
Does anybody want to second that? Thank you, Darren. Then we'll move to a vote. Could you all raise your hands if you agree that this needs planning permission for those reasons? Thank you. We all think that it needs planning permission, so we'll proceed to judge the planning application on its own merits as we have it before us. Ian, do you want to say anything else about it?
Judith, we have Russell wants to read out
yes,
Thorpe's
absolutely.
deputation, so it might be useful to do that first before we go to Ian.
I think it'd be really useful. Yes, thank you very much. I did note that before. Russell is going to read. Councillor Russell Simpson is going to read out a deputation that has been written by Mr. Holman. So please do so.
Thank you. This is from Henry Thorpe. He does apologise in advance. He has dyslexic, so some of the English might be a bit broken. I'm trying to repair it without adding anything at all. So I will start. So this is the property that has motivated me repeatedly to represent the residents on this issue. Having seen the way the committee ignores owners of surrounding properties, I can see the harm that council's policies are doing to the community I live in. I have nothing against HMOs, just the scale of them and the way it is encouraging the permanent removal of family homes in exchange for yet more single occupancy residents alongside all the office and shop conversions and flats. The officer's report is, as I would expect, factually incorrect, with incorrect statistics stating 56% of HMOs, but I will go with that as it helps. But what is more frustrating is that it hasn't picked up on the applicant's own planning statement sent to the inspectorate, or mentioned anything about 15 Shadwell Road, which sets a precedent for refusal of this application. And as always, constructs a positive argument for the development, even though you have given clear direction not to, in this case, by parallel cases. Number one, these properties have been both in front of the committee before and more so in the neighbouring 15 Shadwell Road on numerous occasions, with both properties now resting with the planning inspectorate. The committee knows that this development was against the spirit, if not the exact wording of the SPD, at the time of approval and committed to restricting development. It is acknowledged by all parties that this is a third house of multiple occupancy in a row, 2 of them used as a Class C4 HMO and the third as a Class 3B for special need residents and living carer, which is linked to the council. The committee want and have been consistent in resisting overdevelopment of these properties and 21 bedrooms mysteriously appearing weeks after approval of lesser developments. This is backed up by the committee's strong stance on number 15 Shadwell, and allowing this would undermine the committee's own position. 2. Parking. Let's not brush over the recent death within 25 metres of this property caused, I suspect in no part by illegal parking, which can be seen in the incident. There is no additional parking within 5-minute walk of this property, with the on-street parking well below even the minimum of 1.5 to 2 spaces, and no mixed use. 3. You should require proof of building control as a planning condition. It's funny that the cycle storage gets huge admin and discharge, but things that affect the safety of the community are not, and repeatedly aren't done. No comment on this one, but the report states the work has been done. Why is the status of this not mentioned? 4. It's nice that the house has a study with an ensuite. We all know where that is going, and that the room compromises the communal space is. 5. The planning department needs to confirm permitted development hasn't been exploited by establishing when the initial 2-storey re-extension was done, e.g. before or after the 1940s. 6. Is it a balanced community? Look at the number of HMO and flat conversions. The area is populated enough. Unless you really have the budget for a transport system similar to London and an acceptance of the need to demolish and build up quality housing to genuinely elevate all the community issues this will create. This isn't where Portsmouth North is, and it should retain its family feel. I think the 4 objections are a little underrepresented of the community feeling, with over 150 residents also from neighbouring roads expressing their views via my petition. It was my ignorance that means that when the property comes back to the 2nd, 3rd, 4th time that the petition didn't cover it. That's all we wrote.
Thank you very much. And we've got that on the SMAT for us to read as well, so thank you.
And to clarify, that was you acting as a mouthpiece for Henry Thorpe. Those weren't your personal views at all, were they, Councillor, necessarily? Just to recap, that you were reading that on behalf of a member of the public. Those aren't your views, yeah? Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Right, we need to decide whether or not we've done the decision about whether or not he's planning permission. Thank you. And we now need to move on to discuss the details of this application. Any questions? Darren.
Sorry, Judith, I have more than a few. The first is, how many residents currently live here? I'm saying that because the report itself is confusing and there may be some implications along the way. Somewhere it says 6, because you're increasing the occupancy by 1. It also says it doesn't have a licence, which suggests it's not 6. Because I can't believe a firm wouldn't be that silly as to have 6 people living in it and then choose not to pursue a licence.
So as always, we look at the use class to make sure it is a lawful C4, so you can have up to 6 people. So that's the baseline we'll be making our judgments on. Exactly how many are living here right at the moment, I can't tell you, unfortunately. I can ask the case officer, we have specific knowledge of it, but it is lawfully occupiable by up to 6 people from a planning perspective.
But when coming to a judgment on this, because they don't have a licence, unless they're silly, then I've got to assume it's a small HMO in the terms of the Housing Act, so 3-4 people. Secondly,
if I may, Chairman, again, it would not be appropriate to conflagate the 2 issues. It may well be that it is lawfully occupied as a 6-bed HMO, unlawfully without a licence. Now, it would obviously be for the Housing Department to investigate, or it may well be that it's a lawful 6-bed HMO currently unoccupied and therefore not in breach of any licence, because it doesn't need a licence to be an empty C4 HMO, and they would obviously be seeking a licence following the resolution, for example, of a planning application.
I will be asking the private sector housing team those very questions later on today. Secondly, it got permission for a HMO in 2021, is that correct?
It's in paragraph 1.11.
Yeah, I thought so. Because what was the percentage of HMOs within a 50-metre radius when it got planning permission? Because it's now 56, and that seems a huge increase in such a short period of time, which makes me worry, I wasn't on the committee, that actually it was above 10% when it was granted permission. Because I can't believe there is such a huge increase in such a short period of time. And forgive me, that's my lack of knowledge. I wasn't on the committee, so I don't know.
Simply, unfortunately, I don't have that information.
Okay. Mr. Thorpe asks about what he calls three HMOs in a row, one of which is something that has special need adult residents and a live-in care and has a special use class. I'm presuming that that does not qualify as part of the sandwiching approach under the SPD. Is that correct?
Yes, looking at Mr. Thorpe's deputation, I think he's referring to use class C3, sub-paragraph B, which confirms up to 6 residents can live together where care is provided as a C3 dwelling house, i.e. not an HMO, while from external observations, obviously there's a lot of similarities for the, a resident, such as Mr. Thorpe may well identify. It is, as a point of legal clarification, a C3 dwelling house, because there's a specific allowance for that, with care being provided, not an HMO, and consequently wouldn't count into that sandwiching or other percentage numbers.
Okay. And my final question, Judith, is again, I was on the committee at the time, but he talks about 15 Shadwell Road. Can officers give me a short summary of what went on there? Because it sounds as if it was refused. I don't know, forgive me.
I've asked the officers to clarify. It's currently at appeal, I know that. Whether it was a refusal or a non-determination, I don't know. Either way, a current live appeal.
Okay. Mr. Thorpe implies that it was refused, and so that's why I'm interested. Those are my questions, Judith.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Steve?
Yeah, this is a bit confusing, and it's, Darren's sort of gone near this, but I don't think quite maybe asked the same question. If an enforcement notice was served at some point in the late 70s, that allowed the development, and it was at the time being used as 3 self-contained flats, presumably it carried on being 3 self-contained flats. So wouldn't it have needed some kind of permission to go from 3 self-contained flats into something else before it then became a dwelling house and then applied for planning permission to be a C4? Or did only one of the flats apply to be a C4? Because an address has to apply. So what will be the process for removing flat 1 at 15 Shadwell Road, flat 2, flat 3 at Shadwell Road? I haven't come across that before, Ian. What happens?
A number of different things can happen. You can actually combine 2 dwellings into one and not be considered a material change of use. It's an oddity within the planning system. Taking 1 dwelling and dividing it into 2 is defined as development. The other way, it's a matter of judgment. So it may have been that that's a natural evolution that's occurred since the late 70s, or it might have been an express application to merge any of those planning units into one by seeking a change of use and physical alterations, etc. Unfortunately, I don't have any information regarding that part of the history. What we do know is that more, and with respect, the key issue is obviously it is a lawful HMO today, and it's that basis, however it got to that point, which one must judge the current planning application against. If I may also indulge in to respond to one of the points made by Councillor Sanders, the team have gone back and looked at the 2021 grant of planning permission. At that time, no other HMOs were identified. So either a significant number have been occurred, or, which I think is more likely, which you'll have to accept my apologies for, those percentages are incorrect within the report. So that will be an error in the data file that we're holding. I would suggest, though, please do accept my apologies for that potential error. Of course, it makes no impact at all on the decision either, and Mr. Thorpe has similarly highlighted a concern about the accuracy of the data, but you've got 2 scenarios. Either we've got a lot of HMOs, which is not a number that's changing, and thus is no relevancy to your decision, or you have very few HMOs, which is also not a number that's changing. So consequently, while please do accept my apologies that there's potentially that error in the data file that's been used to produce this, I don't think it makes any material impact on the ability of the council to determine their would have decided in this case. To remind you, of course, this is a valid non-determination appeal.
Steve.
In your own report, you've probably got a map with red dots on it showing where the HMOs are within the 50-metre radius. Can we have a look at that on the screen? Because that might not be 56 and it might give us the actual number.
The plan shows none. Well, so it says one over here in the corner on the far side. So, but again, this is coming from the same data sets. So again, I don't wish to say this backs up. There's probably not many, if any, maybe just the one HMO, which you can see over there. However, I don't wish to hold this up as a definitive map either, because once my team identify that there is a data flaw, of course, we must drill through that and identify. It'll be a middleware piece rather than the data set itself. It just hasn't translated through when a search has been properly undertaken, and unfortunately that hasn't been flagged before now. So if you want a personal opinion, it is likely that there is probably one HMO, and thus we're very low percentages of HMOs, which appears to, and I wouldn't wish to put words in Mr Thorpe's mouth, appears to not depart from Mr Thorpe's incredulity around the statistical numbers within the report as well. But as I say, irrespective of whether it's 100% HMOs or 0% HMOs, it doesn't change the policy position in which you're judging this application. So while I do wish to extend my apology about that confusion, I do advise you that shouldn't have any material impact on the nature of the determination you've been asked to do today.
I'm not sure I completely agree, because if it's not above the 10% rule, we shouldn't be looking at it. 10% rule is the 10% rule. You've got delegated authority to pass those. Yeah, you have. If they're policy compliant and it's under the 10% threshold.
Apologies. So the scheme of delegation defines which applications must be considered by this, and whether or not they're policy compliant isn't one of the grounds. This is here because a member has promoted it to committee for your determination. That's not prejudging the policy compliance. That is a request under one of the paragraphs of the scheme of delegation.
Yeah, but I wrote to you last week, Ian, saying that couldn't we remove those that didn't fall foul of the 10% rule from coming to committee by getting Councillor Vernon Jackson to amend his criteria? And I don't think you said yes.
Yes, because none of them are here because of the policy compliance. It's a matter of the concern that this committee, as you've obviously had to do several times today, that this committee is making its primary judgments on is the definition of materiality and thus development, not its policy compliance. So as we see, some of them here are policy compliant or not. In this case, I can say I can advise this is entirely policy compliant because your policy around mix and balance is the number of HMOs. This is turning one HMO into one HMO, so the percentage of HMOs around it has no relevance on a policy compliance point of view.
Yeah, no, I understand, but I do think there's that slightly, or I won't use the word, the intention of the committee and Councillor Vernon Jackson, as I understand it, was primarily around the other bit of the SPD, which is protecting mixed and balanced communities. I don't think any of us are crackers enough to think that we can even just remove any consideration of the Article 4 direction and insist that all HMOs need to be considered in great detail as to whether or not they are or aren't appropriate development, or even whether they can constitute development. So I think in this, and I've just looked on the database to which your officers would have referred, by the way, as long as it's up to date around this. There's 3 HMOs in the whole of Sheffield Road, so it's clearly that is not correct. I would suggest in this situation the best thing to do would be to defer the item, get certainty over the numbers, and then if it's under 10%, pass the thing.
If I may, Chairman, this is here as an appeal for non-determination. If you are unable to make a judgment today, and I can entirely understand your reluctance to do so because of the inaccurate information within the report, the committee will have no opportunity to input into it. We will have to provide a response for you.
With your indulgence, Chair, all the evidence says it shouldn't be here.
No, to be absolutely clear, Councillor Pitt, the evidence I quite agree around the mix, that percentage is certainly prima facie wrong, and it is far more likely that there is very few, maybe just the one, you can see on the far right of that image, HMO there, not half of the HMOs in the area, being that case, that's far more likely to be the case, and it's simply a translation error by the officers as they extracted the data that you've just looked at yourself, which clearly backs up that image, which is a late edition, which confirms that there is a very low percentage of HMOs. I think I'm more than happy to go out on a limb and confirm that there would be just one HMO. My officers have gone back and rechecked that data while I'm talking to you, and that is their new position. So that would be 3.26%, not 56%. So with apologies, that is the update I can provide you. That is the mix you've got. That makes no difference whatsoever to the reason it's here at committee. However, the reason it's here at committee is because it involves the change of a 6-bed HMO to a 7-bed HMO, and it is that instruction that Councillor Vernon-Jackson has given. Nothing to do with then policy, compliance, etc. That's obviously for officers to make recommendations and the planning committee to make decisions on separately to that question of whether or not a 6-bed HMO on its own merits requires planning permission to turn into a 7-bed HMO on its own merits. There is a disagreement between officers and this committee, as we've just seen, as you've taken the vote on that several times today, and it is that disagreement this committee is effectively coming to you, applying your planning judgment on, and is therefore entirely separate, and why it's been taken as two separate votes throughout this process. And once you've determined this requires planning permission, you then need to look at whether it complies with policy. Those two key policies are obviously the mix, you're well below the percentage, and it doesn't change in any case, and the space standards, you're well above the space standards and fully compliant on that basis.
Okay, but I think the question for me would be, if we had not had to make the decision about whether or not this constituted development, and that was not on the table, would this have been decided by delegated authority?
In this case also, no, there are 5 letters of objection, so it would have come to committee.
God, we're wasting our time.
We have, in fact, had quite a few of this type of application and determination coming to us when there has been a low number of HMOs in the 50-metre radius. Shall we proceed then to any more questions, or shall we proceed to comments and a decision on this one? Could I have a recommendation from anybody, please? Darryl.
Thank you, Judith. I can't propose a recommendation here because I can't vote for this application and probably will abstain for a range of reasons. Each of these is en suite. Given what Steve has rightly said, Steve and I said earlier on about the valuation, this is 7 flats. And this is going to become 7 flats in the eyes of many people. It's just HMO is entitled, but it is going to be 7 flats. And for local people, many local, not Mr. Thorpe, but many other local people across the city do see a distinction between HMOs and flats. And that's an issue we in the city are going to have to live with going forwards, frankly. Because I'm not clear about the status of 15 Shadwell Road and whether that was refused or not. If it's appeal against refusal, that's one thing, and then we can open up why that exists and everything else. I'm not in a position to support or object to this application, so I should abstain on the grounds that I do not have insufficient information, but I can't hold up what is an appeal against non-determination in this case on that basis.
Chairman, if I may assist the committee, just to try and clarify some of the points there. I will establish whether it's an appeal against non-determination or refusal. I must respectfully suggest that's of little relevance to your determination. Every application must be judged on its own merits. If it was refused, it would have been refused for its merits. You must judge this one on its own merits. If it was non-determined, that simply means you don't have any basis to make a judgment on whether or not the impact. So I'm unsure why that would prohibit your ability to make a judgment in this case. I think on that basis, you'll be very cautious in deciding to not make a decision for something that, frankly, you don't have that privilege. We have to respond to the inspectorate for this non-determination appeal. Just to comment briefly on the 7 flats issue, yes, obviously on a layperson point of view, how do people perceive these occupancy? Yes, people may well perceive them in different ways. The existing HMO is I think, entirely en suite. So that doesn't change on that basis. And to conflagate a 7-bed or 6-bed en-suite HMO with 7 or 6 flats is a fundamental incorrect interpretation of planning policy and planning law, and obviously would lead to a total incorrect direction of your decision making, because obviously one of the major concerns of residents and indeed of this committee as expressed today is the loss of C3 dwellings to C4 and to HMO uses. So to suggest this is in fact a block of small flats, that means there will be C3 dwellings, so there wouldn't be a concern on that basis, and the HMO SPD wouldn't apply at all. So it's really important to understand this is an HMO. There is no suggestion in any way, irrespective of what the valuation office may choose to do to define the herediments that require banding. This is an HMO and must therefore be judged, if it requires planning permission, under your HMO policies, which it fully complies with, even if 15 Sheffield Road is granted, and in light of the other one down the road, that keeps you to well below 4%, so something that will be fully compliant with your policy, and that's almost irrespective of what the outcome on Sheffield Road would be. It would be 4% or 2 point something percent. So the 10% rule is well below in the updated data, which again I must apologise for, and obviously therefore room sizes being the key issue, and again more than satisfactory room sizes provided in this case. So there will be no sustainable or justifiable reason to withhold planning permission, but obviously that's the judgment you need to come to in advising the planning inspector through the statement of case whether or not you would have withheld planning permission or granted it, having concluded the planning permission is required.
Question from me while other people are having a think. Mr. Thorpe points out that the study has a ensuite and looks like it might be a candidate for somebody moving in there quite quickly and using it as a bedroom. Is this a case where if we were deciding to give it planning permission, we should limit the numbers to 7, which we have done? I know not entirely within advice, but we have put that on. Or where, and what will be the consequences if they decided to move somebody into the study with ensuite?
Can I give you a statement before I answer that question? The officers have managed to come back and confirm the nature of the current outstanding appeal at 15 Sheffield Road. It's an appeal against a variation, refusal of variation of condition. So it had a condition on it from the 2021 permission limiting the occupancy to 4. It had such a condition. They wanted to have 6 within it. It is that which is the subject of the appeal. So they're appealing against the condition limiting them down to 4. So clearly, looking at the layout and the room sizes and the merits of the scheme today, you can grant new permission, and while officers do not recommend such conditions are necessary, it is within your gift, as indeed was the case back in 2021, to impose a new condition limiting it to 7 should you so choose, and feel that is justified on planning merit.
Thank you. Do we have any proposals, any recommendations, any, Steve?
Well, I was rather hoping you might propose what you just said.
Anybody else like to come in? Okay, if nobody else wants to, I'll come in and recommend that we approve this application on condition that it's limited to occupancy by 7 tenants, and that we have the SPA condition on it. Are we okay for bicycle storage on this one?
Yes, I believe it's already an existing bike store.
Yep. And the other one on the timeliness of the development. If I propose that, would somebody second it? Thank you, Steve.
Chair, can I just add something to try and help, because I'm aware that none of us might be sitting there if it comes back to kill the study, as it were. That the committee we add in that the committee would have found that the communal space provided by the kitchen dining area, given its layout and the narrowness of the corridor leading into it, because you've got the stuff behind the door effectively, would not have been sufficient communal space for the residents due to its layout. And then if somebody comes back in future to amend this to say that they want the 8th bedroom, then we've been clear that although it was compliant as a space, it was the layout of it that was unacceptable to us, and it might just help poor old little studies like save its life.
I'd be very happy to subsume that into my recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Steve, thank you very much.
Apologies, can I check, that would be an informative you're referring to, Councillor Pitt, yes? That's an informative. Thank you.
Well, it's a reason for us limiting it to 7. So it's a bit more than an informative, I think. Yeah. So we have a proposer and a seconder for that. Again, a slightly heavy heart, because we do understand quite a lot of what the deputies are saying about these applications. And can I ask if there are any alternative suggestions, recommendations? If not, we'll move to a vote. Could you raise your hands if you're in favour of that conditional permission being given? 4. Do we have any abstentions? Thank you. Do we have any refusals? Thank you. Planning permission has been granted, and you can inform the inspectorate that that's what we would like to do. Thank you very much. Well, colleagues, thank you very much for going through those, and thank you all for your help and understanding to me as chair. And I look forward to seeing you at the next planning committee, which is on 3 weeks' time, I think. We have still got a very stiff timetable and requirements for us to meet every 3 weeks until we get this backlog reduced, but just to assure you that we are looking at other ways in which the backlog can be reduced and we can get back to providing a planning service that's a credit to our city. Thank you very much.